Hello, everyone. Welcome to an exciting Sunday, Super System Sunday stream. I am joined by the illustrious Ben and Donnie. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, so we are here tonight on a Sunday because, well, honestly, if we're being completely honest, it's because I, as a game master, as a player of role-playing games, have sort of been, one could say, shamed. Another way, and it could be said to be peer pressured into sort of making sure that I have a broader range of knowledge. And so recently, in the last, I'd say, couple of months, I've really been trying to sort of get my feet more into some of the Chaosium games that have existed, going back to the very foundations of the role-playing game hobby. And we're going to talk about that for sure here in the next couple of minutes with Mythras, aka Runequest. But really what sold me on this was that Donnie here, who has been juggling a variety of systems, is always looking for sort of the next thing. And Donnie, we'll talk a little bit about how your campaign structure is set up, because I think it's really interesting. But you got excited about this system. And so I think, and there was definitely an eagerness to talk about that. And so since we've been kind of on this Chaosium kick, it was either this or Earth Dawn, and we'll get to the Earth Dawn eventually. It's just got it standing by. I figured we could kind of talk about this. And then, Ben, you're sort of, I guess I would say, the resident Chaosium expert. And so, you have certainly some of the most broadest experience with this game, this system, and this company. And I think that'll be kind of provide a really nice sort of touch pole point for that. So, So, Donnie, before we start off, why don't you tell people at home sort of how your campaign has been structured and how you sort of, vet systems / use systems, use them pretty differently, I think, than most people do.
Yeah. So I run a homebrew world that started in third edition. It was either third or right at the beginning of 3.5. It's an old world, and it's one that I've had the same players playing in, different characters, obviously.
So over 20 years.
Yeah, it's old. The world is ancient. As far as homebrew worlds go, they tend to last, maybe a campaign or two, or 3 if you're lucky. This has survived many systems, and converting portions of that world from one system to another is not an easy task. It might be fine to go from 3 to 3.5. It's completely different when you're going from something like a Pathfinder 2e, which is the situation I find myself in now, going from Pathfinder 2e to another system, in this case Mythras. And so when I get excited about a game, I'm not some sort of game guru, right? It's just that I don't play as often, and it's a lot of work for me to move from one system to another. So when I got excited about Mythras, I made sure that that Derek heard about it. And so that's why I'm here.
And so I don't want to belabor the point too much, but I am interested in understanding why. So a couple of things. Number one, I think all of us aspirationally, I know that I am certainly of this nature. I've had a couple of large scale homebrew campaign worlds in my D&D career, of course, and there's always that aspiration in my thing to have that sort of, I'll call it generational play, right? Mm-hmm. Where you play one campaign, you tell one complete story, and then the next campaign sort of continues that story, or maybe is a different telling in a different part of the world, and maybe there's echoes of what had happened in the previous campaign. But I do find that it falls flat and short, and I think a lot of times the reason why it falls flat and short for me is because we kind of want to try a different system, right? Like when we finish up a 13th Age game, the last thing I kind of want to do is to jump right into another 13th Age game, right? I kind of want to, okay, let's go play, some other new system. And so that always sort of, and I guess for me, the idea of playing in the same world, but using a variety of different systems, I thought that was very clever. I never heard any of we certainly never did anything like that.
Well, it gets interesting, right? Because first off, it's like that they were building the world as they've played over these years. But the other thing is that I've never seen anybody else do that I throw in every once in a while is important characters, especially important NPCs, or maybe player characters that got retired, of a certain edition don't change editions. as they move forward, as me as the GM and the players move forward in editions. And so, you get a certain look of fear in their eyes when they realize that the archmage that they're talking to is a second edition mage. And you're, like he could cast a spell and save versus death. There is no save versus death. Well, I guess you just die then, right?
I see. So there's like these like Easter eggs to the for the prior games. Okay.
Yeah. But, often between campaigns that we might just go to a completely separate part of the world so that the additions doesn't really impact at that point. So it's evolved over time, but every once in a while, those Easter eggs come up. It's kind of fun.
Yeah. That's sweet.
Do you iterate the world as well, Donnie? So do you have like, you're on the world version 5 now. Did you have like a 2E world and then a 3, did you iterate the world as it went, or has it been very concentrated to one area and it's just a mess now because you've been building on it for so long?
Oh, it's a total mess. I mean, you should see my world anvil for this thing. It's just a monster of. Yes, I use world. I use world under. I used to use Realmworks from Wolflayer Hero Lab Publishing, but I moved that over to World Anvil. But it is a mess, Ben. It absolutely is. I've got stacks and stacks of maps from hand drawn all the way up through Incarnate and Photoshop. My wife's really good at Photoshop. I was like, here, go make me a map, right? But yeah, it's not iterative. It's definitely a kind of a amorphized mutant thing that has grown over these years. Yeah, but it's fun.
You might be the only person I know that has done that successfully. I know I've never done that. I'm really big on just, once it's done, I'm moving on to the next thing.
Yep.
I just like reset the whole world. Everything doesn't matter how much we have invested in it.
Yep.
The idea of keeping the world current, but then using different editions, maybe to tweak out certain aspects. Like you could tell different stories with different engines, right? So
right.
Yeah. How that allows you to tweak the experience.
This is the thing that caused that, by the way.
Interesting.
Earthdawn is the thing that caused that, because as soon as I found out that Earthdawn was in the Shadowrun universe, right? Shadowrun universe.
Right.
Both owned by FASA.
Right.
That's when that idea kind of kicked in my head, and that's what drove that.
Interesting. Yeah, no, that's a really interesting segue, because you're absolutely right. The idea was, sure, they might be separated by thousands of years, but they are supposed to share the same sort of, common universe, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. And, we'll take breaks and play things like Blades in the Dark or do whatever, so it's not always just
so Blades in the Dark was a system too far. That's not something you could just drop into your game system.
No, we'll pull a Knights of Last Call and do a little 6 to 8 episode thing, and then come back. So.
Well, I also think and again, we'll get to Mythras, but I think that in your particular situation, because it's kind of almost the feeling of like, this is kind of really one campaign that has been going on, many, many different seasons. And sometimes, you get a new season, it might have there might be a little bit of a recasting, and you have some, new directors or new executive producers, so it kind of changes up the feel of that season. Everyone's like, oh yeah, season 5 was a little wonky. It was a little crazy. It was a little zany, but that's just because we were using a different system in your case. But when you have something like that, I think the ability to have those sort of palette cleanser campaigns, I think becomes really appealing. And I think, one thing, again, this is, you come for Mythras, but you stay for the RPG ramblings. One of the things I think Smith and I have struggled with, and I know that we recently have been having conversations about this, is the palette cleansers between the campaigns have become the campaigns. And like, we have just started doing more and more of these very short, very hyper focus, sort of with the end goal in sight when you start the race, kind of campaigns. And we've sort of missed out on some of that longevity and that sort of world building, that sort of in situ world building that you're talking about, Donnie. Not like the session 0 building a world, but like the world building that occurs on a very almost glacial pace through natural play. And that role-playing games are definitely, I know I'm very, I don't want to say guilty, but because I do it purposely, but I really push. And Ben, you and I have talked about this, about the difference between our styles of play, about how you're more content to be hands off and let the players sort of do what they're going to do. And I push. But, the idea of a campaign that has years of investment into it is very appealing to me. But then I also go like, oh, but I'm so ADHD with these systems these days. There's so many good games coming out. And so that's why Donnie's approach I think is novel. And the fact that your group is able to pull it off, I think is, pretty cool testament to you and your group.
Yeah, it's pretty
Yeah,
cool.
well-
Like I've seen in my 1E campaign, which is only a month or so in at this point, 22 players or whatever. In the city, the main district, when you walk through the main gate, is called City Gate, and that is like the Times Square of this little city. But it has one of the most affordable taverns that you can stay out that isn't, parasite ridden or whatever. So a lot of the adventurers ended up having the players had their characters staying at this one tavern. Now that they've gone through a few delves, they start getting a little bit more money. They've all shifted down to this other tavern, which is a little more expensive. But those are the kind of things like everyone, it's become like just this zeitgeist amongst the players where they're like, oh, I'm staying at that tavern too, like just through chit chat and stuff like that. So then they set up meetings between the players to set up expeditions and whatever. And that kind of stuff is a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's that sort of naturalistic evolution. It's not forced. It's not being mandated by the system or by the dungeon, the dungeon master. It sort of just evolves naturally. Okay. So anyways, I wanted to talk why it is that you kind of picked this out. Now, that being said, I am going to, I've got the PDF here, but we don't necessarily have to, so this first look is going to be a little bit different, because, this is going to be more about Ben and Donnie. We're going to be discussing the game. And we're going to be talking about the pros and the cons. And really what we're kind of doing here is me, the novice, who does not have any information about this. I just picked up this PDF today. We're going to kind of basically talk about why it is that Donnie chose this game system. What is it that Ben and Donnie like about it? I might play devil's advocate a little bit and try to sort of question them on some of their contentions and beliefs. And we'll talk certainly about the game system. But really, it's kind of like a pitch meeting where they're kind of trying to sell me on the game. And of course, as I always do on these first looks, we're really going to be sort of in the back of our minds, keeping in mind Jared Sorensen's 3 questions, which is, what does this game purport to be about? What does this game say it's about? What is this game trying to do? Number 2, does the game give you the tools and the mechanics, the systems, the subsystems to do that? If a game says it's about heroic adventure and then it gives you a ton of rules for the weight of crowbars and candles in the backpack that you're carrying, you might say, well, those things seem a little bit counter-purposed. It's a knock at Dungeons & Dragons. And the third thing is, does the game reward you for what, the game says? If, you go to classic first edition AD&D, it says, hey, this is a game about delving into dungeons and finding lost treasures. And then the game goes, by the way, the thing that gives you levels and levels you up is delving into dungeons and finding lost treasures. You're like, okay, cool. There's a very clear one-to-one relationship. A lot of PBTA games are like, this game's about exploring your character's feelings. And then at the end of the game system, there'll be a question like, did you explore your character's feelings today and learn something new about yourself or the world? If you say yes, mark experience. And it's like, oh, okay, yeah, the game is rewarding me for what the game says it's about. So with that being said, we're going to kind of keep those in mind as we sort of go through this. So Mythras. So there's a couple of things that we were just talking about this before we went live that you have to understand about Mythras. And the first thing is that Mythras is sort of a sort of a fake name is how I would describe it, because Mythras is really Runequest. And Ben, maybe you could kind of tell us, what is Runequest?
Okay, so Runequest is a role-playing game from Chaosium originally, from the late 70s. It is amongst the first fantasy RPGs that came out in the wake of Dungeons and Dragons, far enough along where they realized they wanted to do something else. So what they did was they came up with their own campaign setting called Glorantha, and then they set this game into that world. So it kind of, in many ways, is more of an update of Empire of the Petal Throne, if you're familiar with that game. Empire of the Petal Throne was indie game, I guess you would call it, that was set in a world called Tecumel. Very crunchy, used a lot of D&D isms in it. Whereas Mythras uses basic role-playing as its engine, retains probably the most crunch of it. So similar to how you have Burning Wheel, and then you have Torchbearer, and then you have Mouse Guard, you would have or Basic Fantasy, Runequest, and Call of Cthulhu.
Got it.
In order of how much of that viscosity of the rules is present in there. So they came out with Runequest. It is just, it's a delight to read if you like reading old school rules where
right. This came out 78, right? So I mean, this is,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah, it's old.
you don't even, I don't think first edition AD&D was even out in 78.
Yeah, this came out after the Monster Manual. So yeah, Player's Handbook.
Yeah, Player's
I
Handbook
think-
hadn't come out yet, right?
Yeah.
Right, because AD&D had a really weird release schedule, right? It was Monster Manual, Player's Handbook, Dungeon Master Guide, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, so I mean this game harkens back to the very beginning of the hobby here. So it's really been around. I mean, it has as much of a pedigree as any of the games. And in fact, as we were talking beforehand, Runequest has had a number of editions, depending on how you want to view it. They don't always have the same great name because it's been published by several companies. It was published by Chaosium, then it was published by Mongoose. It was published, by the game system designers or whatever who own it now. And at one point in time, Mythras was known as Runequest 5th edition or 6th edition.
Yeah.
But when Runequest reverted back to Chaosium, they said, well, we like our game system, we're going to keep it. And they renamed it Mythras to sort of, because they didn't have the rights to call it Runequest.
Yeah. So what makes Runequest particularly interesting as a game is that it's set in the Bronze Age or a Bronze Age-like world. So it is and it falls right into that heavy simulationist, like, what do you have armored? What kind of armor is it? What is your shield? How is it shaped? How is your weapon? How long is it? How slow is it to wield it? Versus these other attributes of monsters and things like that. So it really encompasses that aspect of it. What makes Runequest particularly interesting is that you have high magic, what we call high magic. That's literally nothing compared to Runequest, where it's like everyone is a cleric, basically, because what they do is they use runes to talk to their deities who are very much alive and well. And in Runequest, you have, I think it's 6 different characteristics that are opposites. And depending on your background and stuff, you slide back between these two things. And that's how you create. And you have what's called rune magic. And you can employ them in different ways.
And let me guess,
tons of different stuff.
It's a very crunchy, detailed system.
It's very, very crunchy. It works really well though, but it's very, very crunchy. You have to really be into it. Like if you look at, for the time period, if you look at the 2nd edition character sheet, I mean, it is I think it's 2 sides, ram-packed with tables and stuff. It is very, very crunchy. It does use hit locations, things like that. Crit hits, fumbles are very, very bad and are very much part of the system itself. You'll notice a lot of similarities between it and Mythras and Call of Cthulhu. Virtually the same in terms of its raw mechanics, but the game itself is very high, not high fantasy, very high magic with a mythological Bronze Age bent to it.
Yeah, I mean, you said the Bronze Age, and I've actually got the Runequest art that you sent me, Ben, and I've got the Mythras, and it's kind of cool how they did like a nice homage to that. And
it was nice, right on the cover.
Yeah. So it very much clearly very inspired by that. And you can kind of see the garb has kind of a bronze. I mean, they look like they were even wearing bronze helmets, Bronze Age things. So that's interesting because, right, we usually sort of associate, especially nowadays, I would even say late medieval period, almost Renaissance era technology. And this is sort of even saying this is sort of a Roman or pre-Roman era, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah, definitely. This game, which we will see, does pass the simulation test. There's candle, damage, and radius in this rule set. So
right. For those of you who don't know, that was something that Ben determined. Was it will I like this game, Ben?
Pretty much, yeah.
Do they give me the rules for not only how much light a candle generates, but how much damage it does if you attack somebody with it? We had a super chat from Great Role Playing Debbie, or I should say Role Playing Debbie version 2, who says every single name being mentioned is before my birth. You know what? Honestly, obviously this game came out before even I was born. So, but what's interesting about it is, growing up in the 80s, I mean, it was, it's like this is the closest analog I have to being a modern 5e player. All I knew about in the 80s and even into the early 90s was Dungeons and Dragons. You know, I was barely aware that these other games existed. And certainly I couldn't find them at, you know, Walden Books or B. Dalton's or wherever I was going to at the mall to pick up my latest, you know, second edition handbook or whatever. And even, you know, and probably if it did have it at like a local hobbyist store, I probably kind of just glanced over it and just assumed it was, you know, too much. It was two things. So it wasn't until I picked up GURPS. That was like my first foray into a wider world. So Donnie, before we get into some of the specifics, and again, you guys feel free to talk to me about it. Like, what have you played Runequest before? Like, what made you want to pick up this game, and like, what are some of the factors about the game system that kind of spoke to you? Because, you know, Ben was talking a little bit there on a nice little overview, but I also understand that this is, you know, this was a sort of a modern reinterpretation of the classic Runequest. And before we went online, you were saying how they the people who designed the game have a supplement book which is designed to sort of bring in some of those classic RuneQuest elements that may not be in the core game. So I kind of want to understand what drew you into this system and what made it really pop for you, or what really made it sing for you.
So my disdain for PF2E combat is what drove me here, right? And not because that combat is bad. I don't want to crap all over.
You can crap all over it.
It's because the way that my group and I play, it didn't gel very well.
So I'm just curious, what does that mean?
So it meant that combat was taking entirely too long. You know, when I was visiting up there, we talked about it for a little while, but you know, we were having combats that were taking well over an hour for a relatively short, what should have been a short combat, 4, 5, 6 rounds. And it was because of a couple of different factors, but it was because the 3-action system, I'm gonna eat my words on this later. The 3-action system ended up slowing us down a little bit because of who my players are. And then also a very kind of...
Are you implying that your players are prone to analysis paralysis, or?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
That's absolutely it. And then, you know, kind of an esoteric reason, a very far out there reason is I live very far away from my players. I live more than an hour from my players. Well, except for my wife. She's just downstairs. But I live very far away. So when we play, they come to me. And so they stay the night, that type of thing.
Oh, okay.
And ends up that there's a lot of wine that is consumed. And then towards the end of the combat, you know, everybody's feeling very loose. It takes a little while to figure things out. And so I was really looking for, and the reason that I chose Mythras is because I got on the Discord and I said, hey, Ben, give me a game that I can play that's going to be faster on combat. And then he said, yeah, sure. Here's VSD. No.
That's against Dark Master, for those of you who may not know. And we did a first look on Against the Dark Master. So if you're in the first look playlist, or if you go to Dice Last Call and look in our live streams, you can find our first look at Against the Dark Master. It was a pretty long stream, so you're buckle up. But anyways, continue. Against the Dark Master is a D100 system, right? It's very much inspired by Middle Earth role playing, which I would argue has sort of a lineage or history in that sort of D100 space. But that didn't do it for you.
No. As soon as I saw that we would have to track the number of torches that they kept on and how long the torches burn, I was like, no, we're not doing that. So my requirements when I asked Ben this question was, I want a non D20, and I want, you know, something that I can convert characters to, and I want something that has a faster combat. And he said, well, here's Mythras. I went and looked at it. Before I even realized that it was Runequest clone, or was Runequest. And as soon as I got into it, I realized, hey, I've played this years and years and years ago. Hadn't touched it since. And so now that I'm getting back into it, I'm realizing my love for that system, and especially what Mythras does on top of the default Runequest. And we'll get into those later. Amazing system. And it turns combat so deadly, it becomes less deadly, which is crazy.
Okay. I'll bite. So what do you mean it's so deadly, it's less deadly? Because to be clear, there is something that you kind of hinted at a little bit, which I do think is important. And this is something I don't think people fully appreciate unless they've played the game. And I get it. Like, and this is a little bit of a tangent. You know, I really still play a lot of Magic the Gathering, not as much as I used to. And one of the things about Magic the Gathering is you have lands in your deck and you have spells in your deck. And in order for you to really be able to play the game, you have to have a balance of both. And it's a random draw. It comes off the top of your deck. And there it creates great and incredible gameplay, tons of strategy. But sometimes when you're playing your opponent, or you or your opponent will only draw one of the type. You only draw land, or you only draw your spells. And the game basically fizzles out and it doesn't happen. So there's like this 10 or 15% of your games which are just non-games, right? It's a really bad ratio. And you could argue this was a really horrible experience for somebody. And there have been a lot of attempts at modern games to try to get rid of that, to make it so that you don't have this, I'll call it 15% failure rate, and instead create a more homogeneous experience. And they have done that, but none of those games have stuck with the people in the way that Magic the Gathering has, because there's something in that very, dare I say, visceral game that creates an experience that when you do win or you do succeed, it really sticks with you. And one of the things I was saying that I don't think a lot of people appreciate is a lot of people will look at a game like, basic Dungeons and Dragons or first edition or even 0th edition AD&D, and they go, or D&D, and they say, how could that be interesting, right? Like your fighter just has a swing of his sword. There's no feat. There's no special ability. You're not leaping through the air. You're not doing some sort of anime power. It really just looks like you're basically doing nothing but basic attacks for the entire combat. That seems like that would be the most boring thing in the world. And they would be right, except that the stakes are so high. And it's kind of like, would you rather have something that's simple but delicious, or something that looks very ostentatious and beautiful, but it tastes like shit, right? And so it's like, there's something to be said about a game system that is very simplistic, but the experience, the visceral feel of like, it's just a basic attack roll. Yeah, you're like, but this is life and death here. You are going to, perk up. And while it may not engage certain subroutines that people are interested in engaging in, like, I really want to be able to maximize this build and, do this super intense tactical square counting exercise, which I get. That could be fun for people. It does engage you on a little bit more of a primal level. So I certainly appreciate the desire for a deadly game. But I am curious how you say a deadly game makes it less deadly.
Well, I mean, yeah, let's jump right into it, right? So Mythras is a system that has hit locations. You don't have an overall pool. Each one of your hit locations has a certain number of hit points. And those hit points are determined, just like in most of the BRP systems, those hit points are determined by size and strength, two attributes of the system.
So you mean my leg has hit points?
Your leg has hit points. Your head has hit points. Your stomach has hit points.
So it's battle tech in person form.
It's not too far removed from BattleTech.
Yeah, I mean,
and the armor is ablative, just like in BattleTech.
Does my character sheet have like a little outline with like little armor circles or whatever?
If something that looks just like it, yeah.
Yeah, and each hit location also has armor associated with it, right? So you might be the kind of person that doesn't wear armor on their right arm because it, for whatever reason. Or you don't want to wear a helm, which is stupid in this system, but you don't want to wear a helm because you think your hair looks great. Those hit locations, like even if you have something like, I think it's up to 40 size and strength combined, right?
And to be clear, this was a new thing for me. We're jumping around a little bit, and that's totally fine. Yeah. Call of Cthulhu or BRP systems have a size attribute as like, you have strength, you have dex, you have intelligence, and then there's a actual attribute called size, which literally is like, if you have a high number here, you're tall and big, and if you have a small number, you're small and petite, right? So anyways.
Yeah, so and you roll those attributes, depending on the attribute, you might roll it with a 3d6, right? Or you do a point buy system. But you get the idea that, if you have both an 18 in your size and your strength, that gets you to 36. You look on a little chart that tells you have 8 hit points for your head. Guess how much damage a longsword does? 1d8.
Got it.
Plus damage bonus. So that one hit to your head might make you unconscious. It might kill you. It might just flat out kill you. Right.
Just like taking out the cockpit on a mech in BattleTech, right? Could end the fight real quick, right? Now, does this, we're kind of diving in here, but does this mean that the game, because I'll be honest with you, I don't like called shots. Does this mean that the game is nothing but called shots?
No, we'll get into the specials that allow that, but not
Okay.
not at the moment. So it basically, when you roll your damage, the way that I prefer to do it is you roll both the hit location, the damage, and your to hit at the same time. So you roll all the dice at once.
Got it. So we're rolling 3 random rolls here, not just accuracy and damage, but
Yeah.
hit location as
also
well.
Yeah, so it's got that roll master VSD thing where you have to divide down, you subdividing those rolls into the minutia. Everyone is at the edge of their seats waiting to find out what the final solution is going to be. It's very much like, putting a firing solution into a submarine, which I absolutely love. And every time I've run VSD, they have been the most fun combats. Everyone is just laughing the whole time as waiting to see what the end result is going to be. And that's what makes this game particularly interesting, which we will get into. But there's a meta currency where you can buy to get advantages to allow you to do those specific types of strikes. But also, the game gives you enough leeway if you don't like that kind of stuff, how you can work around it. It doesn't just say, well, if you don't like a rule, don't use it, and then gives you nowhere to go. It gives you every alternative possible, and you can select on that dial from 0 to 100 how much crunch do you want. Just remember, or you should note that 0 is still going to be about as crunchy as old D&D. D&D, I mean. Like, it starts at like first edition D&D level of crunch, and then it goes into super simulation after that, just depending on where you set those dials.
Yeah, so
to bring it back around to your question, though, about how does that become less deadly?
Yeah.
Right. If you have 4 hit points on your left arm or your right arm, say you're right-handed, and you have 4 hit points on your right arm, and you take 4 hit points, your arm is useless. You're probably not going to stick around to see, hey, maybe I can bite this guy to death, right? You're going to run.
Got it.
Same way with the NPCs, right? And the book actually calls it out that death is rare. Death should be rare. There should be consequences.
Right.
But even a monster that loses a leg is going to run.
Right. And actually, that makes a lot of sense. Well, maybe it'll hop away, not run. If it
Hop away. That's true.
Hop away.
But one of the problems with hit points is that you are fine at 100% hit points, and you're fine at 1 hit point, right? There's no indication you're getting fucked up. It's time for you to go, right? There's no wound system. There's no sort of ablative sense to your combat abilities. There's no death spiral. And like there, in fact, a lot of times, sometimes I think in AD&D, especially if you're playing a game where it's like, oh, if you run away, they get free attacks or attacks of opportunity, depending on the game. Sometimes the better option is just to stick it out, because you're not losing any combative potential. And it's like, yeah, I got another round or 2 in me. And so the party ends up pushing themselves to that very limit where if a couple die rolls don't go their way, suddenly it's a TPK. As opposed to being like, well, after the first 2 rounds, I'm pretty messed up. I'm not dead or close to it, but I can clearly see I'm not going to win this fight. My abilities have gone down. It's not that they've maintained or even gotten better. I got to go. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, once you start taking penalties, any game that does that too, I particularly enjoy as well. Once you start taking penalties,
but Ben, like death spirals?
Second round, yeah, by that second round when everyone's at -20, -30, or rolling with penalty dice, I mean, they got to start thinking like, okay, what is our exit strategy potentially going to be? If I can't pull this off this round, guys, we need a way to get out. And it makes it that makes it very interesting, because now it's a different kind of story. And when you introduce combats, it's also very different. Whereas in a D20, you're introducing combats mostly to have something for the players to do. So maybe they can either get a clue for where they're going, or it's just, most of the times, because you just do it. Like, why are there mooks in the game? The mooks are there for them to have something to do. Whereas in this kind of a system, or in Rollmaster, it is a purpose. There are no random encounters. Right. I mean, it's like, it's there for a purpose, and it will jack you up.
Yeah, I mean,
if you're not careful.
I mean, in some ways, it kind of reminds me of our experience playing Legend of the Five Rings. And, we played, I think it was like 4 or 5 sessions before we had our first skirmish. And, I think Smith has talked about this, at least on our Patreon Q&As. I don't know if he's done it on a live stream, but they had gone to the Imperial capital, and they had this really tense situation with an opposing clan. And on paper, it went really well for them, but they had kind of embarrassed in this social setting. And on their way out of the city, a group of that rival clan's, Bushi warriors kind of cornered them on a street. The peasants are fleeing the scene. They don't want to be anywhere near it and bearing steel and challenging their honor. And Smith, he goes, look at me, I'm shaking. And he goes, because it's like I feel like those people have swords. Like, I know that sounds stupid, but it's like a lot of times when you play D20 games, it's like, I don't really feel like they have swords. I know that sounds silly, but you're like, that thing could cut me and it could take out my character's arm. It could stab me through the heart and I'm dead instantly. And it just became so much more visceral. Yes, there's a lot riding on it. Yes, a lot could go wrong, but it made you stand up and pay attention,
I think intentional is the word that I was thinking.
Yeah.
Those type of encounters become more intentional. You're not just throwing random things at the players so they can feel like they had a little bit of a workout that night.
Right.
It's a very different kind of setup.
And to be fair, I mean, if you have a player base who goes, we like combat, I like kicking ass and taking names. If I have a session, if I sit down to play for 4 or 5 hours, I want to have 2 or 3 combats. Maybe you shouldn't be playing that game then, because certainly like Legend of the Five Rings, because you're like, you won't survive, like it's not for that. If you want to just grind out combats, you probably need a game system that's maybe a little bit more forgiving. You know what I mean? Okay, so I got the contents up on the page. So I just want to really quickly kind of go just at a high level. What is this game about? So we do have a link in the description below in the doobly-doo to our Drive-Thru RPG affiliate. Now, we get a couple percentage point. Doesn't cost you any additional money, but if you do buy this PDF, we get like 25 cents in our Drive-Thru RPG credit. And thank you to everybody who uses our Drive-Thru RPG credit link, because that's how I'm able to pretty much buy these PDFs for these first looks. Is I usually use it due to the credit that you all gave me from the previous first look. But yeah, you can take a look there. Actually, in this day and age, PDFs have gotten pretty damn expensive. The last couple PDFs I've bought have been like $25, $35. This one's on sale, I think, for $10 right now for the core PDF. And it's a long book, 301 pages long. So you're getting quite a bit of bang for your buck.
And there's a Mythras imperative, I think is what it's called. That's also pay as you want, and it's a slimmed down version.
Okay, so if you want like kind of a quick start version, you can even pick it up for free. So
yeah,
there you go. All right, so table of contents. We've got a couple of pages about how to build a character, determining starting characteristics, attributes, nothing that we haven't seen in most RPGs before. We have a section on culture and community. We don't see as much here about races. We just see about whether you come from sort of a civilized cultural background civilized background or more primitive or nomadic background. So
the system kind of assumes that you're human.
Okay, I was going to say, this feels human-centric, yeah.
There are rules later on that talk about if you monsters as players, and then if you pick up the classic fantasy kind of add-on for it, they give you the full elves, dwarves, halflings.
Got it. So definitely not, like Ben was saying, definitely not your high. It feels a little bit more Hyperborean age kind of feel, like
every live play that I've watched of it has been some sort of Viking, some sort of, Conan feel to it.
Yeah. That makes total sense to me. Because I mean, again, Conan to me feels very much in that sort of like a mythical Bronze Age that never was, sort of post Atlantis, but pre what we would consider modern history, right?
You could easily do that with Mythras. Easily. You just set up, Harkanians as a type of culture. Shadazar is a certain type of Sith people. Stygians is a certain type of culture, and you literally move the widgets for that culture into that area, and bang, you're done.
Awesome.
Ben and I will go on and on and on about this. This system lets you do what you want, tells you to take rule systems from it, and if you don't like them, just toss them, and you won't break the system. So that's the best part about it.
So that's interesting. So it's more. I mean, I'm sure there's an element of integration across the systems, but it feels more like a bundle of various subsystems or modules rather than one sort of discrete whole. If you don't use this, the whole game collapses, type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's some elements like the attributes. You're not going to be dropping attributes, right? You got to have a size attribute. But beyond that, it's like use it, and if you don't, it's okay. The system won't break.
Yeah.
Okay.
To me, this is the cutting edge of good game design right now. With Peregrine at the top of that heap right now, who did Dune. He worked on Doctor Who Second Edition, and you have Nash who worked on this. Same kind of aesthetic. They both design games that have lots of rules, lots of subsystems, but then within those subsystems, they have tiers of how crunchy you want to use them. So that, like the combat engine, it's like you can use the simple combat engine or the complex combat engine. Chases, you can use the simple chases or the complex chases, or somewhere in between the two. What I like about that type of design, it lets the GM or the group decide where they want to do it, because sometimes you want to have like crunchy combat, but have everything else be real simple, and then slowly go into the more detailed kind of approach.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because Smith and I were talking just the other day about 5th edition D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, and we were talking about how in the initial phase of the game, I was pretty involved with the playtest, and this is when Monty Cook was still attached. And I know Monty Cook has his haters and he has his supporters, but at the time when I was driving out and doing some of these like in-person playtests, and I actually had an opportunity to play with Monty Cook, 5th edition was being designed as a very modular game. They wanted to create a sort of core system like Donnie was talking about. You're going to have 6 attributes. You're going to have strength, dex, and con, wisdom, charisma. But combat might just be basic attacks and theater of the mind and movement. Here is the advanced combat module, and you could use it. Maybe it's sold in a different book, or maybe it's part of the DMG. But either way, the core system of the game works just fine. And if you want to add a more complex skill system, or if you want to add a more complex combat system, if you want to add a more complex magic system, you could do that. And we love the idea of that design. And obviously,
man, that play test was,
yeah. Yes.
I loved the original play test.
The original D&D Next was
so much fun.
Was a lot of fun. It was. And then the final release, they just, I don't know if the marketing people, or if, the masses and the play test sort of poo-pooed it, because eventually Monty Cook got pushed out, right? Mike Merles came in and kind of rewrote the system into what we had today. So anyways, very interesting. So we have a little bit more here about your community, your families, so allies, contacts. So, building out a whole structure of not just a character, but a character in a place, right? With elements. Passions, interesting. And it looks like there's 4 pages here of passions. So that suggests that there is something to be said about that. And that feels, sort of personality narrative based. So I'm interested to take a look into that.
Yeah, it's another game that uses, we've done 2. VSD uses passions, but
yes,
obviously this is borrowed from Pendragon, and this is borrowed from Pendragon as well. They work virtually the same across all 3 of those games too. the way that they do,
awesome.
The way that you invoke them, I guess,
almost down to the number, actually, the way that they work. So
okay. Now we have careers, which sounds like classes, but it's only 8 pages long. So this suggests that there's not a whole lot of meat to the careers or the classes, that these aren't lengthy pages of endless abilities that you're picking from. Although I do this weird, the last one, cult membership, does strike out at me as being a little bit strange.
Yeah, it's very much, you have to think of this as very much, this is the chassis. You're bolting what you want onto that chassis, and it gives you a lot of freedom to do it. And by cult, obviously they mean the anthropological culture, not cults the way we think of cults, and drinking Kool-Aid,
right? Like
for aliens,
the cult of like cult of Zeus, cult of whatever.
Yes, mystery cults, which is where Mythras comes from, because Mythras was originally a shortened version of the god of the moon, something like that. That's what the word Mythras comes from. So Runequest is very much inspired by mystery cults of ancient Rome, and then they just lifted the word. Literally, they just took the definition of the word and made it like, it'd be like if they made a combat heavy version of 5e, like a OGL, and they called it fighter.
Right.
It's very similar to that.
Then we have a section on skills. Then we have a section on economics and equipment. There's some you don't see every day. And getting, again, pointing to some of the simulationism here. We've got accommodations, clothing, livestock, tools, right? A lot of the stuff that you expect to see in these little bit more simulationist heavy games. It's like, I want to know how much a head of cattle costs. Then information about the game system. It looks like it's in alphabetical order about just all the different sort of effects, or, do we have water pressure rules? Remains to be seen. We do see
the elusive water pressure rules.
Right. We do see drowning and suffocation. So there's that. Combat, and we'll get into the combat. Magic. Well, I do want to talk about magic, although it does look like there's a variety of magics. Folk magic, animism, mysticism, sorcery, theism. And then lastly, it looks like we end with information about the cults, a little bit of a bestiary, and then some game master stuff. So, so interestingly enough, introduction, I did see something here when I was scrolling through it. And it says, the core rules are straightforward and intuitive. Usually a player rolls d100 and aims to score equal to or less than a value, a skill or a passion, for instance, on his or her character sheet that represents a certain chance of success. However, the game includes many rules that add greater depth, modify results, or enhance the play experience. And while most could be considered necessary for play, none are essential. Indeed, if you do not like a rule, or if you find it confusing, or if you find it slows things down, feel free to ignore it completely. And that is not language that we see, that often. Like a lot of times you'll see rule 0, the game is yours, make it your own. But that's kind of a cheap way of saying it, right? Like this is really, putting your money where your mouth is, right? To really kind of come out.
That's just lip service from those other systems.
Yes.
This is the first system that I've actually looked at that they mean it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like what Full Metal Dragon says in chat. They said, it's always better to have a rule and not need it than need it and not have it. And yeah, I mean, especially if the game can actually handle that, I think that's an interesting take on it.
Full Metal Dragon also mentioned a little earlier that this system is meant to be kind of generic, right? Because you can just bolt on like a superhero thing, and they've done that. Destined is the superhero rule set.
Yep, and I would say that in that case, the Mythras itself will fall a little bit short of the first rule in what the game is about, because really this is a toolkit for the GM to build what he wants, and then. Thinking about it a little bit more, when you got to the money and equipment chapter, it reminded me, oh yeah, that's right. Runequest really isn't about money at all. Bartering, which is why it talks about cattle and stuff. Bartering is much more the way that people, because it's Bronze Age, the way people encounter things. I think in 2E it was like wheels and clacks, where is the money, and a wheel is like very similar to Wheel of Time, where it's just a wheel is like a gold coin, and then they take pieces off of that, it's gold or silver or copper, and they take pieces of that metal, and then they use that as for trading, just a sliver of the precious metal. So I forget now in this game if they actually have an economy at all, because in RuneQuest there really isn't much of an economy, because it's not part of the core experience of playing. You
mean you don't require that? It doesn't necessitate that you have 75,000 GP at level 10 so that you can buy a +2 sword?
And the other thing too, it's funny about it, is I was thinking specifically because it reminded me of the Conan conundrum of like, if they don't have an economy system, you're definitely going to need one if you want to like skin this for Conan, because that's all about the loot.
Right. Although it's weird, right? Conan was never about the money in a weird way, right? He wanted money, but then he was never possessive about it. He just wanted it for its own sake, and then he would spend it all. But yeah, Lovefist says wheels, lunars, and clacks. There we go. That's cool. So we designed a character, pretty normal here. It does have a blank character sheet, which I do have here as sort of a for our people at home.
And I think is it 4 pages, the character sheet in this game?
The one I have here is only 2, so I'm not sure.
Okay,
yeah.
So it's modest for this kind of game.
But
it's not too bad.
But yeah, it doesn't look like it's that horrible. It's a little cut off here, but. Looks like we have strength. Again, some of these are pretty D&D like. Strength, con, dex, int, charisma. We're missing a wisdom, but I'm sure power is sort of a willpower. And then size is the one that kind of sticks out there as being our 7th attribute. Characteristics. And then you have attributes. And here we have a bunch of stuff, some of which is familiar to me. Damage modifier, sure. Movement rate. But we also see things here like initiative bonus. But we also see things like action points, luck.
Okay, this is where I'm going to eat my words. Right.
Okay, luck points, experience modifier. So are these things that you roll, or are these derived from your characteristics?
They're derived. Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
And that's where it kind of mimics what we're talking about pre-stream about SR or strike ranks, where this action points kind of gives you that the ability to break rules, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
Got it. And then we've got a whole mess of standard skills here in the bottom. which I'm assuming again are probably, you know, like what's the word I want to say? These are like everybody
your ride, your sleight of hand.
Everybody has these kind of type skills.
Yeah, depending on your profession, you'll have certain base skills.
Got it.
It works a lot like Call of Cthulhu, like we did. You know how an investigator will have a suite of skills that come with their career? Same thing here. It's based on the same engine, so it uses the same kind of modularity, I guess is the word I'm thinking of.
Got it. And it looks like basic percentage is, you know, a combination of stats. So, you know, if your strength is 10 and your dex is 20, then you have a base chance of 30%. Now tell me about the lightning bolt and the checkbox.
Lightning bolt and the checkbox.
I don't know. That's what's on the character sheet.
Yeah. So checkbox you need in any BRP system. The checkbox is key because when you succeed at a skill, you check it. Yep. And then when you have, I don't know what they call it in this game, but I'll just use the Call of Cthulhu terminology. An assessment phase or an advancement phase, you're then going to roll against that skill. And if you fail it, you increase that skill.
You'll get things called experience rolls.
Not
experience rolls. That's what they call it here.
Not points, rolls. Interesting.
Yeah.
Rolls because you don't know what you're going to get.
Just like in Call of Cthulhu, right? Like if you're higher at a skill, right, you're less likely to get the improvement, right?
Yes.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
So it's kind of a gambling aspect even to the advancement. Now, again, we're just trying to paint around here. Can I put points specifically into athletics? So like if my strength, let me put it another way. Does it start at strength plus dex and then I could increase it separately compared to that?
Yes.
Got it. So basically, even if I never put a single point into athletics, because I have a strength score and because I have a dex score, I will have this base, 20% or 25%. But if I want to put more points into it, I will raise that base percentage.
Certain careers will give you the ability to do that, whereas in some other careers, it doesn't make sense necessarily to have it. So you'll have the ability, you'll want to put them somewhere else.
Yeah. And again, we've talked about this on the Call of Cthulhu system stream, but this system of percentages is very intuitive, right? It's very easy to grok that, hey, my percent chance of success here is 75%. Okay, I that's what I need to roll. And that makes it a lot easier, I think, for people to understand.
And it also hates generalists in the same way. If you think I'm just going to spread my points out evenly, so I have a base 50 and everything pretty much, that is a pretty mediocre build, and you will probably get your clock cleaned on a regular basis as a result of that.
Got it. And then we see a big block here for professional skills. So that's like what, like the role-playing skills, basically, like I want to be a wagon maker or something, or...
Well, when you get into your career will have a list of skills that you will have a pool of points that you can put into.
Got it. So this is more like specific to your class or your character.
Yeah, like a longsword or spear, like those are skills. It's not like
got it.
It's not like weapons. This is very much in that old school vein where what proficiencies do you have? You want to use the things you're proficient in and good at, and you want to avoid the things you're not proficient in, unless you want to just do a Hail Mary and hope that you do it, because you know that when you get the experience roll, you probably have a good chance of increasing it, but probably not best done in the heat of combat.
Right. Then we see that there's a separate section for magic. We can get into that when we get into magic. We can see that there's not only the stuff that we saw, folk magic, mysticism, but also binding and trance and shaping. So magic seems like it has its own whole little sub world system here. And then
that's where it gets into the RuneQuesty parts.
And I will say that as far as like coming from one system and trying to migrate to another, the most time that I've had to spend on this system is in the magic section, because it's very much here's some suggestions. Now GM, go make those.
Yeah, it's a grab bag that's the one thing about the system. It definitely is a heavy lift from the GM. You really got to be wanting to go, I'm going to create something using these rules. And you might even, like, for example, in our VSD group, that group would be great. I could chuck this rule book at them and go, I want to make a Conan game. And they would go through and be like, we like this, we want to do this, we want to, and like, but not everyone has a group of people that would do that, would read a 300-page book and then give you a report afterward of the things they want to use and not use. So if you don't have that kind of group, then it's really on the GM to have to come up with that stuff, because the game doesn't necessarily give you a way of playing it.
Without going too deep into it, Role-Playing Debbie had asked a question earlier, says, if you're familiar, would you say the rune system for Magic is more like pre-made spells or more like the words of power from PF1? So I'm curious, does the Magic system lean more towards the D&D model of, here's this list of sort of Vancian prepared spells, this is what you can do and nothing else? Or is it a little bit more free-flowing and free-form?
So they have examples in each one. There's in the core rule book, there's 4 or 5 schools, if you want to talk to, and they vary in power from folk magic being the lowest to sorcery being the highest. And they have examples of spells in them. If you wanted to get that more, like, here's a set list and these are the ones for that, you would go pick up Classic Fantasy, because that Classic Fantasy has Magic Missile, it has Detect Magic, it has all those already spelled out for you. But in the core rule book, you're just going to get these examples, like Blade Sharp. Okay, well, maybe I'd want to make Arrow Sharp or something. You would have to do that as a GM or as a player coming up with an idea.
But are you doing that beforehand, or is that something that you're doing like at the table? It
depends on the school of magic.
Got it.
It depends on the school of magic.
And then the last thing I just want to call out to before we get back to the main core rule book is here again in the bottom right of our character sheet, we see this passions with a percentage. So there again, that does remind me of the versus D thing as well. And then going to the second page really quick, we get to some of the fun that we were talking about a little bit. We could see that the movement has a bunch. There's a bunch of calculations here. Run is move plus athletics percentage divided by 25 times 0.5 meters times 3, which is different from a sprint, which is different from a walk. So
yeah, because they all cost. You have to spend points to do these things. So it's all is very, very, very. What's the word I'm thinking of? Specific,
right? Crunch.
Like in this, the words have meaning. Like sprint is mechanically different from a run. It's mechanically different from a walk or a hop or whatever the case may be.
Yes. Gabriel says metric. It does appear to use meters, which is fine. Then we have a big table here in the middle with hit locations. We've got the D20 roll, the location, the armor. I don't know what AP means. Armor.
It's
okay.
armor.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the hit points relative to that specific location. We've got, looks like 9 levels of fatigue. And then we have our resistances, combat styles, and all the information about our weapons and shields. And on top of that, we also have some information for our spells, spirits, talents, and miracles. So it seems like you also end up getting kind of a couple, maybe, unique tricks up your sleeve, like some, for lack of a better word, D&D type powers or feats, right? Where maybe you end up with a special talent or something magic, like a magical miracle or something that you could pull out.
Yeah, more like Sinbad. Think more like Sinbad. That's probably closer.
All right.
That's good.
So obviously there's a lot here that is similar to our sort of core D20 experience, but there's also obviously a ton that is quite different. And so we are going to get into that. For making characters, it looks like you can either roll randomly or use some sort of point buy system. We've got our strength, constitution, size, which again is the how big you are. Dexterity, intelligence, power is your character's soul, spirit, inner drive, capacity for magic. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, if I ever create a D20, I don't like wisdom anymore as a stat, because I feel like I don't like the paradigm of the different spell abilities for spellcasting. I think there should just be one stat for spellcasting. I don't see why it's separate. And the idea that a character is only really smart when they're a wizard, I just don't like that idea. I like for intelligence to be sort of different. And quickly looking at this intelligence bonus, I could see that, I can't remember what game system it was. But there was a game system where you used intelligence like in like your attack roll or something like that, or in your armor class. And I always thought that was, you know what? It was 4th edition D&D. In 4th edition D&D, your reflex save was determined by the better of your dexterity or your intelligence. And I thought that made a certain amount of sense. And as I look here, it's like, oh, your intelligence is obviously used for your, character's smarts, but it's also used for your initiative bonus, and it's used for your action points, which we're about to get to because Donnie said he was going to eat his words when we talked about action points.
I just want to point out that you can't go one stream without talking about 4th edition D&D.
It's fair enough. I'm just saying, I like it when intelligence is not necessarily tied to magic, and I like when magic kind of has its own stat. But in any case, power is the characteristic that marks the character out to the gods and other supernatural powers. And it's like, it gets around any like the mess, like why does a character who's perceptive makes a really good, druid or cleric? Like shouldn't a cleric have to have good intelligence? Like a dumb cleric doesn't seem like that makes any sense unless they're trying to make some sort of snide comment about order or organized religion. But anyways, then we get our characteristics. Those are our attributes. These are our basic, D20 style attributes, but we get characteristics, and those are our action points, damage modifier, experience modifier, healing rate, height and weight, hit points, initiative bonus, luck points, magic points, movement rate. All right. Action points. This is how many times a character can act in a combat round. And it looks like it's going to be probably 2 or 3. Yeah. This looks a little bit like Pathfinder 2nd Edition's 3 action 2 but sometimes it's a 2 action economy.
Depends what you do.
Yeah. So I said that's the part I didn't like, and I ended up finding another system that had action points. But the way that the combat uses action points here is different. It's the action points are a very specific thing that you're doing in that combat round. Is it a proactive action? Is it a reactive action? And is it you're not doing a flurry of blows necessarily. You're doing one swing. That's one action point.
But to be clear, in the base rules, if your character is intelligent and dexterous enough, they are going to be taking 50% more actions than their less dexterous, less intelligent companions. And potentially there might even be a character or a monster perhaps with very low attributes who only has 1 action point per turn. Is that?
Yeah, it's very much like weapon speed, right? In 20,
sure.
Weapon speed, so you can have a big weapon that probably does a lot of damage. It's almost always going to hit first because it's longer. But then the smaller weapon, which is much faster, you will get more attacks. So there's always going to be the trade-off.
Right.
This system is probably a little bit closer to Forbidden Lands if you're familiar with that combat engine where you have fast
and slow.
Yeah, it's more closer to that.
Yeah, but still, there isn't a situation where a character gets 2 fast actions and a slow action, and other characters only get a fast and a slow. I'm being devil's advocate here, but I could see a situation where basically everybody goes, okay, well, you got to make sure you have at least a 25 combined in dex because you're going to want the 3. In fact, to the point where the game seems to understand this because there's immediately a sidebar where it says optional rule, fixed action points. Everybody just gets 3. Or
that's what I was going to say. They automatically know that, not everybody's going to like that. So just ignore it. Again, the system is very good about saying, don't use it if you don't like it. So
yeah. I mean, again, I could see a world where you're fine with that. I like the idea. Plus I like the idea in the fiction of the game, of like the narrative fiction. I love the idea of the like the big, huge ogre or like the dragon whose attacks are unbelievably powerful, but moves at that almost kind of shadows over of the Colossus type speed where it's like, no, a lot of times people talk about boss monsters, when they're designing Pathfinder 2nd Edition. And I've talked about this myself, and they're like, yeah, give them more actions per round so that they're more dynamic. And I'm like, there's a part of me that doesn't want them to be dynamic. I want them to be these big lumbering beasts.
Yeah, man.
And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, please.
Oh, it's a great example of that is Middle Earth strategy battles. The trolls in that game we are learning, they do not get many attacks. But those things, when they finally hit, because you're picking away at them, then when they finally do get to hit, they are just laying out entire units. And you're like, there's something to be said about that. They're just slow, lumbering, but when they finally get to you, it's pretty much your character is going to have a broken arm or whatever the case may be. To me, that's what makes it great. That's what gives it that like the intensity is there.
Yeah.
Instead of everyone doing like a Pirates of the Caribbean / Daffy Duck, which is very Pathfinder, was like do 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 do, bouncing around like doing a million things. It's not necessary. And yeah, for this game against certain monsters, you're going to want to have 3 action points for everyone, or otherwise the GM will be a little bit limited in what he can do. So yeah, I don't see that as a power gaming move as much as the GM goes, all right, what are the players telling me with these builds?
Right. And honestly, not to go off on a side tangent within a side tangent, this is one of the reasons why in the last decade or whatever or more, I guess more now, but I really enjoyed running Dungeon World at cons and stuff, and especially in a classic D&D sense. And I see people's feedback to that, because Dungeon World doesn't have an initiative system, and so I can sort of, when I have the big huge monster, right, I can like just keep going back and forth, and then at the moment where it feels appropriate, it does this massive attack, and it's like, what do you do? Like, how are you different? And so rather than having the monster go all the time, I have it go infrequently, and that builds that tension that much more. And I found that to be a very very effective technique to really impress upon the idea of the big, huge, lumbering, scary threat, rather than like the chittering hordes that are swarming around you and, sort of nickel and diming you to death, right? It makes those type of creatures feel differently. Whereas like in Pathfinder 2, the kobold gets 3 actions, and the ogre in molasses armor gets 3 actions. So it's kind of the same kind of deal there. All right. I can see now why Donnie likes Mythras, because the damage modifier doesn't add a static bonus. It adds dice steps. So you're like, oh, you do D8 damage with a longsword? No, I do D8 plus D8 plus D6.
Yep. That's it. And the fight won't last very long as a result of that, right?
Well,
because you're doing 28 points of damage in one hit.
Again, I don't want to go off on make any assumptions here, but if we go back here to this chart with the hit point locations, doesn't look like they go that high. It looks like they max out at 10, which is a little scary when you think about the fact that you have a base weapon damage, like maybe D8 or D6. And then if you have a good strength and size, you might be adding an additional D10 or D12 to that roll. You could easily see where, unless you have some pretty substantial armor there, you're going to be in trouble.
Well, in this game says you need armor. You probably should have a shield, and you're going to hold an action point to parry all the time, because you have got to reduce that damage.
Got it. And this gets back to what you were talking about before, which, by the way, another thing that Smith and I love, and we've tried to do this for years, is to create a balance. Forbidden Lands does this with they have that parrying and blocking rule system, where I love the idea of I've gone on less about this before, but where your character has these actions, and if you have to save some for defense, so you have to save some for offense, and so some characters might go all out and be a literal whirlwind of death and destruction, but they didn't save anything back to protect themselves, which might either mean because they are big and brutish and they don't really worry about it, aka they have just a ton of hit points, or maybe they're very heavily armored and they don't need to dodge, they don't need to block, right, as so much, because they've got thick armor and they're counting on that to absorb sort of the damage. But in any case, and by the way, something a little subtle here, these are just things that I've looked at a lot of these. I like that they say here, the reason why. They tell you, hey, this is, strength and size matters for damage because, this is the reason. This was our thought process. For action points, intelligence and dexterity matter, and this is why. All right. Experience modifier is charisma. Interesting. Over the course of play, characters improve their skills and capabilities. This is achieved through the use of experience rolls, which we kind of alluded to earlier. A character's charisma score may adjust the number of experience rolls the character has, reflecting the relationship he has with his peers and his reputation within the community. If the charisma is high enough, people are willing to put themselves out there to help train or support the character. Conversely, if your charisma is low, you may have difficulties. So basically, are you a nice person? Like, do people actually want to help you learn, or do they say, get fucked?
Can you convince that sword master to teach you a new style or something like that?
So I don't know that I buy this 100%, but I do like it when, every stat means something. And I guess this makes some degree of sense, like the high charisma character is just able to, maybe get a little bit more training. Because we think of experience points, but it's not really quite, it should be called like training rolls or something, right? Healing rate is how many hit points are recovered per day, week, or month. You don't usually
depending on the wound level. Yeah, depending on the wound level.
When you talk about monthly recovery rates of hit points, that is we're already talking about a brutal kind of game here.
Yeah, it's definitely more in that Rollmaster VSD or school. I mean, they're both cut from the same cloth, pretty much, in terms of what you can expect from the game.
And then here is our hit points per location based on our constitution and size, as Donnie was alluding to. So, assuming that your attribute to roll in 3d6, Donnie, sounds like
you can do a point buy, but 3d6 is the other optional roll.
So, something like a 10 to a 12 is probably fairly average. Yep. So we can assume then that if our constitution is around a 10 to a 12 and our size is around a 10 to a 12, we are probably going to be looking at only maybe between 4 to 5 hit points for our head.
Yeah.
And longsword's D8 plus that damage bonus.
Yeah.
Aches. That is tough.
Yep.
And obviously you can see your chest has the most, your arms less, and your legs a little bit less as well than your chest. So interesting. Okay.
Yeah, which is why when you go back to that cover image, you can see that female warrior, as good as she is, she's probably bound for a world of hurt.
Yeah. Right. Like you need to get some more armor on there. Nothing on your arms. So do you think that this creates a situation? I'm just curious. When I see this, my first thought is, so is this a system where everybody is just like a walking Sherman tank, where like nobody would go without armor? I mean, obviously D&D has always had that paradigm where it's like, well, yeah, you want to be in armor, because there's always like the classic, like, oh, I want to play like the character from the movie, like Conan, like where it's like, oh, you're not wearing armor, but in real life, you fucking always wore armor, right? Because like there was no like, oh, but it's balanced against being more dexterous. No. If you had access to full plate, you wore full plate. If you had access to chain hauberk, you wore a chain hauberk. If you had access to a piece of thickened leather, you wore a piece of thickened leather. You wore the best that you could afford / your culture was capable of making. There was no trade-off.
The system kind of like, it's going to penalize you for wearing heavy armor. It's going to penalize you in initiative for wearing heavy armor. It's going to penalize you in fatigue for wearing heavy armor. Right. So there's a trade-off there. But yeah, I mean, if you don't parry, you don't evade, you're not wearing armor in a location, and you didn't choose to, preventively block in that location, well, yeah, you might lose an arm or worse. Right.
Which, by the way, is what happens when you fight with swords. And you're not wearing anything, and you're not making an active attempt at your defense. You tend to, get chopped in limbs and lose them.
Yeah.
So like it or not. All right. So we have the initiative bonus, which is again the faster you respond. So is this like a classic initiative where it's just in order, like high to low?
It's I believe it's a D10.
Is it high to low or low to high? I always forget. I know in Runequest 2E it was low to high. Okay.
No, it's high to low.
Now, how does that work in relation to those action points? Do you get to take all of your actions on your initiative order, or is it staggered?
So the way that it works, and this is where this is what lets me kind of not eat my words when I talk about the action points. So you go in an initiative order, high to low. First person goes. They can choose to do a proactive action or not, and you can only do one. And a proactive action would be maybe close range or attack. Right. So which you're going to attack, right? And then whoever they're attacking can then choose to use one of their reactive action points to parry or evade or outmaneuver. And so right there in that first person's turn, you've already used action points from two people.
Right? Got it. So in other words, if you had a low initiative and a bunch of people are coming at you, and you're spending your actions to dodge and parry, by the time your turn comes around, you may not have any actions left to do anything.
It's entirely possible, but there's things that you can do called like outmaneuver, right? If you're getting swarmed, you can outmaneuver and try to put distance between them.
Got it.
Things like that. Or flank and things like that. But yeah, I mean, it's entirely possible. Getting swarmed in this game hurts badly.
Right. Yeah, it definitely seems. And also, by the way, one of the reasons why I've always liked that system is that I had always tried to aspire to in D20. And in fact, I think I've shown it before on the screen. I don't know if I have one of around, but I used to have this system in when we played Pathfinder 1, I created this system called the reactions system. And what it was designed to do was basically designed to be like, hey, if you are the expert sword fighter, in 1v1 combat, you are very much at an advantage. But when you're outnumbered, your ability to dodge, parry, riposte, block becomes very greatly diminished. And that's where sort of the slower character who might have more armor, aka if you are, swashbuckling your way through the city, you might not need full plate. But if you're going into like a battle, like especially like a rank and flank type battle, you want to put your armor on. And Aaron and I always joked about this from the Lord of the Rings films, where Aragorn wears, his leather jerkin, whatever, throughout
no helmet
or whatever. Yeah. But then when he gets to the battle of, Minas Tirith, he fucking puts on full plate. He's like, well, I need a helmet. I need big, strong steel plates on me because I'm going into battle against 25,000 orcs, right?
And the only time that he took the helmet off is in Return of the King, when he thought it was a suicide mission at
right.
the very end. He was like, well, this is the end, so here we go. He's no helmet. Just
it's what Donnie was saying. He took it off for the charisma. He needed to give the speech.
For the charisma bonus.
Yeah, he needed the charisma bonus from the speech.
But you know what? Just before we move on, talking specifically about like this reaction type stuff, Dominion Rules, which is a game that very, very few people know about, but they really, really, really should check out. You can get it for free, or you can get it from Lulu for like $11 or something like that. It is a medieval combat simulation RPG. It does have some fantasy stuff as well, but it really, where it comes into its own is with the combat fightings. And what you have in that, first of all, it's a dead simple engine. You roll a d12 and you're trying to get as high a number as you can, but as close to a target number. So if it was like a 9, you want to roll as close to a 9, but without going over. But they have something called timing roll. And the timing roll is your position in the duel against another combatant, where you are. And your timing depends how many actions you can do. Super, super cool. It's really good. It's a very, very, like, I don't want to say underrated, but it's not one that gets name checked a lot. But man, it's really good, in line with what you were saying, because in Pathfinder in particular, 2E, where you have all these actions and they're always used all the time, how can you leverage that to make them important? Because the number one complaint people might have is no one knows what to do with that third action. What I do when I run PF2, when I was running it, is I made it real simple. There are no death saves in my game. And then when you're at, you get to go to negative, I think I did to negative 15 or negative 20 HP before your character died. And what I did was, at 0 hit points, you're not unconscious, you just lose an action. And at negative 10, you lose 2 actions. And then at negative 15, you lose 3, and then you die. So at one point, you're completely, basically helpless. And once again, you're trying to think, how can you leverage it mechanically to make it, to increase the investment that the players are going to have?
Sure.
Guarantee you, in a game like this, when a combat actually starts, everyone is 1,000% invested in what's going on at the table, whether they're in the scene or not. You're going to have players throwing their pinging around and telling you what to do to try and help you out. It's
right. Great. And that's something that actually that Smith and I feel very passionately about, which is, we always say this, like even in Pathfinder 2, where I go, I wish that these D20 games were more aggressive with giving characters reactions and giving characters things that they could do when it's not their turn, because it necessitates you fucking paying attention, right? There's so many times where you play a D20 game where you go, I just took my turn. It's going to be 10 to 15 minutes before it's my turn again. And for the most part, I don't have to pay attention anymore because I'm out of the game. I'm no longer an active participant in the game. Whereas I was always trying to create systems. This goes back to 3rd edition. This goes back to PF1, where I was trying to create situations where it's like, no, you can give these bonuses. They're quick, they're easy, they keep the pace of play going, but it requires you to be paying attention. And so when something happens, you go, oh, I have something for that. Boom, take 5 less damage, or, oh, boom, let me help your armor class out really quick, or boom, let me do something for you. Because I think that the problem with that sort of turn-based initiative is you feel helpless. And so to your point, like if someone's trying to, a bunch of monsters are closing on you and it's not your turn in D&D, you go, oh, well, shit. But like, if you can go, I'm going to do this reactive maneuver, I'm going to fall back. It makes you just feel so much more empowered than, and it also makes the game feel less like a game of chess, right? Like a board game where it's like, my character is standing here, not doing anything while he is completely surrounded by, and flanked 18 different ways to Sunday. That would never happen in real life. The other example I always give is, the heavily armored fighter is standing there and you're playing on a grid and the monster just goes, just like walks around the fighter and starts wailing into your cleric or your, wizard. And you're like, this would be like playing football and having like, the offensive lineman just like stand there while, the tackle came right around them and they did nothing. It's like, no, that's not how it works, right? You need, you give up so much with that turn-based initiative. You need something, I think, to make it, go back and forth.
Totally agree. It's funny because in my 1E game, I actually added reactions into it.
Oh.
The player has 3 reactions they can put in a round. You can parry.
Yep.
You can fall back.
Yep.
Or you can set against a charge.
Sure.
So even if you're being charged, if you have a set weapon as a reaction, you can still set it right before
and the
they
fact
come
that
in.
you could do that as a reaction, because I'm aware of those rules, by the way, for people who don't do those rules, it means usually you get to make the attack first and you get to do double damage, I believe, if that's correct, Ben. But
that is correct. Double damage and you attack first.
Which means that a character with a spear, suddenly the spear becomes a fucking great weapon, right? Because people typically want to charge in because that way you can close the distance and still make an attack. And so suddenly having a line of spears becomes a legitimately scary prospect, which feels very appropriate and also gives those weapons sort of a natural credence. So I really do like that. All right, back to Mythras. Luck points. Okay, so this is where the game maybe gets a little bit less simulationist, right? This is more of a little bit more of a narrative thing. Like your characters are bound, they're maybe not quite Taveran, but they are definitely a cut above the ordinary. And so depending on what your power stat is, you start with a certain number of luck points. And the pool decreases, and when one is out, none are available, unless the game master makes an impromptu award until the next game session when they replenish their normal value. So this is a use it or lose it resource. That's kind of cool. Like if your character has a lot of power, you might get 2 or 3. I don't know exactly how luck rolls work or luck points work because it's a different system than Call of Cthulhu because it looks like it's only 1 or 2 or 3 points. But either way, I like that. It's like saying, hey, you can have a lucky character. And I think that is something that D&D does a bad job of. And I like the idea of it being like a lucky character. Magic points, again, relies on your power as well.
It's funny, just real quick before we go too far, about the idea of the luck is another thing that I think influenced a lot of these old games that you don't see in modern games because the fiction has changed. In other words, we now have Brandon Sanderson and these other writers. So people's idea and the post-Final Fantasy video game world, people's idea of fantasy has changed because the media that we consume and the fiction we consume is very, very different. That to me, like that type of luck mechanic is a very Fritz Leiber, Robert Marr type of thing. Like you can just be lucky. It's such a fantastic idea of like, you have Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser. They weren't particularly good at what they did, but what they were was very lucky.
Right.
And you see that in the stories. And I think, why not have that be a viable class? Like, that is my shtick. I'm lucky. Why not?
Right. And again, there's no way to really represent that in the standard D20 version. But again, we see this all the time in fiction. I mean, literally, in Wheel of Time, that was Matt's whole shtick, was that he was just lucky. It's like, hey, what do you do, Rand? Well, I'm the reincarnated version of the savior and or destroyer of the world, and I'm like the most powerful male channeler of all time. What about you, Perrin? Well, I can communicate with wolves, and I can enter into the wolf dream, and I'm a badass of Tel'aran'rhiod, and I can move through dreams. What are you, Matt? I'm really lucky.
I hear dice in my head.
Yeah, I'm really lucky. And it's like, yeah, that's cool. That's a fun shtick to have, which I think is a lot of cool. Unfortunate Pumpkin says, I think the lucky character concept is still pretty common, but it's in anime, not in our standard fiction. And I kind of agree with, I don't know about anime having the lucky concept, but I do think that you're right, that I think there's something to be said about it's like a modern obsession with skill, you know, like with these hyper, you know, the John Wick type character, right? Just this, they are the pinnacle of badass. They, you know, they are just skill, in control of their destiny, total Sigma male, right? Like there's the idea of just like they're just lucky, you know, they're kind of a not necessarily a goofball, but they're not particularly a badass. They're just
competence
lucky.
porn.
Yeah, competence porn. That is a great way to describe it. So then we get to magic points. And then lastly, movement rate, which is, again, just a basic how far you can move. And there's some calculations about that. So I'm curious, as we kind of think about these the character sheet and the stats, Donnie, like which, obviously some of these are very different from your standard D20 game system. So I guess the main thing is, like, what do you think that these attributes combined with the characteristics, how does this give us a different experience than you would get from like a D20 game, like a Pathfinder 2nd edition or a D&D 5th edition?
Well, you already mentioned one thing, and that's taking away wisdom and adding power.
Yeah.
But ultimately, these are the same stats that we've grown with, you know, in Fantasy 20 since, you know, 1975 or whatever, 1978. The outcome of these, the skills that you get, are what make BRP, in my opinion, the superior system to just a flat D20. And I understand that mathematically, it's still just, you know, a D20 is just a d100 divided by 5, right? But it feels different, in my opinion, and especially when you start talking about how like modifying your attributes, which is possible in this game, but at a horrendous cost. Modifying your attributes affects so many of those skills at one point. Like, for example, and this comes later, you might get 3 experience rolls during a session. Maybe you want to make your character more powerful, so you train against, you know, I want to make my 18 a 19. Every session from that point on, you have to spend an experience point. You have to spend an experience roll to maintain that level. So it's not a permanent change. So there's just some like little tweaks and rules like that really make it feel less like a normal, you know, D&D character set.
In the sense that you think it feels more, I don't want to say punishing, but like, you know, is it like what is the net effect of that? Is it that things feel harder? Is that like what you're trying to go for here? Like a more difficult
the word
game?
Visceral. The word visceral comes to mind. Not necessarily harder. Yes, you have to maintain. You're punished for some stats being a little bit less. But at the same time, if you get a good stat, you're going to be walking through people, right? If you get that massive size and happen to get that massive strength, that damage bonus is huge. It's no longer just, hey, I've got a +4 damage. It's I've got, you know, +1 d8. And that means I could take a guy's head completely off with one swing. And that's huge. That's
so with that in mind, would you say that the concept of the fair game or the balanced game is not really a concept in Mythras / Runequest? This is where Ben and I tend to agree. I don't know what a fair game is. I don't know what a balanced game is. Oh, it's very simple. It's a game where the players always win, but it seems like they might not.
Yeah. No.
That's what modern day fair and balanced means. I mean, that is what that means in today's standard.
Yeah, symmetry is what I would call it. This game is not symmetrical in that sense.
Right.
No. You're either going to be like way more powerful than the person you're fighting, or there is 100% a chance that you might die.
Yeah. And again, this is something that gets brought up a lot and people talk about a lot. I do think that there's sort of 2 important concepts to talk about when we talk about balance and fairness. The first is the idea of parity or lack of parity between the player characters themselves. And this is a classic, and I've seen this, right? I've played 3E. We played, 2nd edition. We played a lot more 3rd edition. We played rolling your ability score modifiers. 46 drop low. And you would have the character who had like we rolled it 46 rep low, they'd have 3 17s and 18s, and then you have the other character that's got like a bunch of 12s, and like 114. And the other character was just a house. I remember playing second edition and somebody finally fucking rolled like an 18 charisma and they were a paladin and their character was just leagues better than the other character classes because they just had all these crazy abilities and their saving throws were through the roof because of their paladin abilities. And, they felt special because those character roles came up, the way they were. But I also think that there was an idea back then of like, I don't know how to say it, but it's like it's almost like rolling a great character felt worse because like you're like, number one, you felt like an obligation. Like I'm carrying the team on my back. And number two, you suddenly were like, well, I don't want to fucking die. I don't want to lose this amazing character. And so a lot of times they didn't put themselves in the kind of situations that other characters would. And so it kind of, in a sense, held you back.
It reminds me of I think it was a Dragon article, and it was talking about a fighter with a low strength. Like, what do you do with a character that has a poor attribute in their core skill set? And it was a fighter with an 8 strength. And the idea was that this fighter would very high charisma, bought this house, stapled the deed of the house to the front of her shield because the house was haunted, and then went in to clear the house out, right? And she was using her charisma and she was using all these other things. But yeah, I agree. A character that rolls that 18 double aught, you're like, okay, well, that's what I'm doing. But a character that is maybe a little less than in certain situations can make it more interesting. Well, but if you want that balance in Mythras, just do a point buy.
Sure.
There's a 75 point buy.
Okay.
You're done.
And that's pretty standard. I mean, that's pretty cool. Like, yeah, that way, I mean, and again, I'm here for it. Let me just say that, I'm here for the 1 in 400, 1 in 300 character that just blows the roof off. I love that. My player group, I was talking with a buddy of mine who I used to play D&D with 20 years ago, 15 years ago, hasn't really played with us since then. And he recently moved back to town. And we were talking about perceptions of third edition. And he was like, oh, I never saw that. I said, yeah, I know, because we were very much like, anything goes type players, but we had this self-balance. Like, right, when we had a character in the party who was kick ass and the wizard was just disintegrating the villain, everybody else was like, that was awesome, right, dude. Like, it was great. That thing could have totally killed me. And it didn't, because you just one-shot it. There was never a feeling of like, oh, I feel bad that you were, So it's like when you have somebody in your party who's the high size, high con, high strength juggernaut, you're like, all right, everybody line up behind him and let's go. Like it's almost like it's your QB, it's your larger than life. And I think that's fine. I think a mature group of people can handle that. I do think that modern gay games try to overly balance the playing field. You know what I mean?
They try to force the hand.
Yeah. I call that the Fezzik effect.
Well, it's
from Princess Bride. You had Fezzik, like you have that guy. Just who's going to be clearing the rooms. Who's going to be kicking down the door.
Right. Well, and the Princess Bride's a great conversation, right? You have Inigo, who has the high fighting skills, high things, maybe not the greatest intelligence. Then you have Vizzini, very high intelligence, low on everything else. Fezzik, really high strength, low on everything else. And then there's Wesley, who's just better at everything than all of them. It's just like he's the uber character who rolled insane on his stats. Gets the girl.
You suspect some cheating with Wesley.
Right. Beats the giant in strength, beats the Spaniard in sword fighting, beats Vizzini by his brains, gets the girl at the end. Just gets it all. And you know what? Sometimes that's okay. We don't all it's the Incredibles line. When everybody's special, nobody is, Yeah. And again, I know that for a lot of people who maybe are more of a newer, and I run a lot of modern day, average, sort of respectable games. Hey, we just got a $50 tip from Anonymous, who says, Anonymous, if that was you, go ahead and claim it. Says, hey guys, great stream. Great conversation. So thank you so much. Unfortunate Pumpkin has to head out. Unfortunate Pumpkin, it was great having you in here. So yeah, so our tip goal of Donnie and Ben, we got reached.
Bye, Pumpkin.
So take care, Pumpkin. It was good seeing you. But thank you, Anonymous. Again, let us know if you're in the chat. appreciate it. But yeah, so if you haven't only played modern day games, I grew up playing sports. I played individual sports. I played team sports. I played hockey, and I think in a good way, in a positive way, there's something to be said about having a superstar on your team. Like, do you think like I understand, like when you're like a 10-year-old and you're like, he's so good and I suck. Like, do you think an NFL player is like, we drafted the best quarterback in the league. This guy's going to crush the opposition and just deliver bomb? No, they're psyched. They're like, dude,
who doesn't want Gretzky on their team?
Right.
Or
They're
Michael
like,
Jordan.
Right. You're going to turn down Michael Jordan? No. Like if you had to play in an era of the NBA and you had a choice to be, a chance to be like on LeBron's team or a Michael Jordan team the year that they went to the championship, are you going to pick that or are you going to pick something else? No, you're going to pick the LeBron or the Kobe or the Michael Jordan team because you want to be part of greatness, it's Henry. Henry says, that was him. That was me. Appreciate the stream. Well, thank you, Henry. Appreciate that.
Thanks, Henry.
Well, nice hat, by the way, Henry. Henry was doing some Ren Fair today.
The wizarding hat. That was cool.
Yes. Yeah. Made it to the top messages. I think it got more than 10 likes or something. Yeah.
Quick too. He was like at the top of the charts real quick. But to our point though, I think because you and I, Derek, and possibly Donnie, if you maybe read a little bit more of those kinds of games, but we're both fans of Mark D.S. Truman. And Mark D.S. Truman is known for putting asymmetry in his playbooks, where one playbook is clearly can be used or can be stronger than the other playbooks. And he loves that kind of thing. And if you do any design seminars with him, he's really clear as to, that's what makes the game interesting, is having that push and pull between characters that you can't just have this like niche protection all the time. To him, that's not interesting. So he doesn't design games that do that, don't deliver that kind of experience. And like you said, everyone is expected to be grown-ups and just figure out a way to let that be. Let the game embrace that a bit.
Mm-hmm.
If someone chooses to play it, they also are, a certain type of player is going to be gravitated to those kinds of builds, right? So
absolutely. And so, anyways, I just think that's something to be said. It's kind of interesting. All right, so skills. I don't know. Is there a lot to talk about in terms of skills? I mean, we see here the standard skills. A lot of these sound fairly similar to either stuff that we've seen in Call of Cthulhu or Versus D, but also your standard D20 game. Concealment, dancing. Deceit.
They're pretty straightforward.
Straightforward.
The thing about the skills that you won't see is, other than unarmed, you won't see any weapon skills.
Right. So everybody can do a little fisticuffs, but no.
But you won't see any. You won't see anything other than unarmed there. And the other thing is that it's a standard BRP. It's a 10% crit. You fumble on, I believe, 96 to 100.
Right. So 5.
Yeah. Pretty standard there.
Yeah, and I don't see anything that really strikes me as being strange.
No, those are pretty straightforward. So
everybody can sing.
There's 3 types of rolls, right? There's your normal roll, there's an opposed roll, and a differential roll.
Okay.
The differences are, like, on an opposed roll, if you both succeed, whoever has the higher number wins. Differential is degrees of success. Differential rolls are typically used for combat.
Now we saw in Call of Cthulhu, and that was part of the sheet, that it basically had you pre-calculate your divide by 2 and your divide by 5. So in other words, if you had an 80% boating skill, you would sort of pre-calculate, okay, I also have, when the task is tough, my 80% drops to 40%. And then when the task is insanely difficult, right, it drops down to 16%. Does Mythras have a similar system or a system for understanding difficulty of a task, like of applying that?
Let me check my my annotations here. No, it does. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 levels of skill difficulty.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it goes from automatic to what is that? Hopeless, Herculean, things like that.
Got it.
And those have values associated with having them or doing whatever. I greatly prefer the alternate rule, which is, if it's harder, it's 20%. If it's harder than that, it's 40%. If it's harder than that, it's 80%.
Got it.
Both ways. So
got it. So Yeah, because I mean, I will be a curmudgeon here. One of the things I dislike about the percentage system is that it gives you this great intuitive sense and feel, you know, of being like, hey, you have a 70% chance of doing this. And I love that. But then it goes, psych. Not really. You know, sometimes it's going to be 35% and sometimes it's going to be, you know, and it's like, so it feels like it has this great concept. And again, I think we all understand intuitively too, that like, okay, I still understand what 35% chance means. It means I have a slightly better than 1 in 3 chance of doing this. But I think one of the advantages of having that system is kind of mitigated when you have all of these ways that it gets, you know, changed due to the difficulty. And like, I'm not trying to say that like Runequest or Call of Cthulhu should be like Powered by the Apocalypse, but if you think about Powered by the Apocalypse, right, there is no DC, or rather the DC is always 7. You're always trying to get a 7 or higher to get a hit, or a 10 or higher to get a good hit. And so there's an enjoyment to that because it feels very quick. It's very intuitive. It's very quick and very efficient. And you can look at your character sheet and go, I know how good I am at this. And I do think that the game Call of Cthulhu.
Totally disagree though, but yeah. And here's the reason why. Because I mean, in my day job, I'm fairly skilled at what I do, as are the both of you. But I mean, I have days where I just can't figure something out, or it just everything is stacked against me.
Yeah,
it's just the way it happens, and I'm not crawling into holes in the ground and fighting kobolds. I like the idea where you can tune that to how bad of a day is this person having? How are the odds stacked against them? What are they doing that's crazy difficult? And that's why it has what's the lowest difficulty? There's no roll required, right?
I think he said automatic or something.
It's automatic.
Automatic. So you can have it play exactly the same way, where everything is automatic until it's not.
Right.
And then you start having these levels of difficulty come in.
So I will counter your counter by saying that I agree with you. In first of all, that I get where having because on the surface, this is where, you know, I think Powered by the Apocalypse and Dungeon World do not do a great job. I say Powered by the Apocalypse, but most people are familiar with Dungeon World. Don't do a great job of expressing this concept. Magpie has tried to express this concept. It is rather instead in John Harper that they do a better job of this with the other game that is on Donnie's shelf or behind him, which is Blades in the Dark. And where I like Blades in the Dark is the percent chance of succeeding does not change, right? If you're rolling 3 dice in Blades in the Dark, you roll 3 dice and you look at which die is the highest, and that determines your chance of success. If you get a 6, at least 1 6, you fully succeed. If you get a 4 or 5 as your highest, you get a partial success. And if you get a 1, 2, or 3. So that doesn't change. It doesn't scale. You don't take away dice when something's easy. You don't add dice when something's very easy. You don't take away dice when something's very hard. What changes are how much of an effect you have on the situation, and or what are the consequences should you fail. So it allows you to have that sort of, I know what I'm rolling, and I don't have to like play this back and forth game. But there's still these levers though of, okay, but because you are in a very disadvantaged situation here, if you fail, it's going to be really bad. Or maybe, yes, your chances of success don't change, but you're kind of out of your depth here, and I don't know how effective you're going to be. So even if you succeed, the effect that you are going to have is going to be fairly minimal. And this is represented by sort of position and effect in what we call it in Blades in the Dark. So that is my personal take on that. I that is what I have come to enjoy, rather than altering the odds. I like altering what does this roll accomplish if it succeeds. In other words, if you pass, do you get a lot or do you get a little? Do you get the normal amount? And then if you fail, how bad is it? And so that's kind of where I've shifted to that.
And that's why this game still holds a special place in my heart, because the success in which if you get into an advantageous position and it ups the step, which means the number of dice and the type of dice that you're rolling, that also impacts the damage that you're doing, for example. Or,
sure.
Because it ups the step of the damage. And so that one actually does both, which I appreciate. So.
Right. All right, so we've got our standard skills, but as we said before, there isn't anything here for fighting or combat. And so this is where the combat styles comes in.
Yeah, these are interesting. So combat styles are, at the beginning you saw things like cultures and you saw backgrounds. These can influence what your combat style is. And the combat style is typically 1, 2, 3 weapons, maybe a shield. Maybe if you want to run a slightly more higher fantasy game, right, you might put an effect in there. So, for example, if you were going to make a berserker, right, you might put berserk as one of the combat style options. But most of the time in Mythras, by default, it's going to be a couple of weapons, maybe, armor, shield, something like that. And so you're equally good with all of those that are in that combat style. So when you're doing your combat actions, that's what you're rolling as your combat style.
Got it. I see. So if I'm an assassin, I'm rolling my basic percentages on dagger, short swords, bows, and crossbows.
Yes.
But if I'm a barbarian, I get it on great swords, broadswords, battle axes, and shields. Okay.
Correct. Yeah.
And again, this gets back to what you were saying, Ben, about this being kind of a toolbox approach where you could build this and say, oh, you're Harcanian, so you get these bows because they're famous, they get horse archery or they get horsemanship and bows and this and that. Oh, you're Sumerian, you get something different. Oh, you're from Styx or whatever, so you get something different than that, So that's interesting. Now, I don't want to get too much into culture here, just because I think we don't have a ton of time, and we've talked a lot about skills. So obviously there's got a lot of list of what all the standard skills do. What does boating really mean? What does brawn really mean? But I do want to kind of get into the idea of the game's approach to skills a little bit, and you could see here the automatic, very easy, standard, hard, formidable, Herculean, hopeless.
Right there in that upper right, that's that rule I was talking about, the optional rule. So ignore those 8 steps and just do standard deviations.
Got it. So in your mind, then, if something's Herculean, which is a minus 80%, they could go to negative, which means no chance, unless they roll a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Do you use that? Is that like the way it would work? They always have that 1 in 20 chance.
Ben, correct me if I'm wrong, but I do believe that a 1 to 5 is a success. It's not a crit, but it is a success.
I don't know if it's an auto success in this game, just because I.
Well, let me ask you.
Many d100 systems in my head at the moment.
Let me ask you as a GM, regardless of what the rule is. Fuck the rule. Like if somebody had a 40% chance at, say, boating, and they're like, I'm going to sail through the great maelstrom and we will reach the Isle of Avalon ere the day come. And you're like, okay, well, it's a Herculean task, so minus 80% to your boating check. So your 40% boating becomes negative 40% boating. I would
do the opposite. I would say, how much luck do you have? And they'd be like, I have 3 points and it's taken me 6 months to get them. Great. You burn all 3 of your luck and I'll just let you do it.
Oh, okay.
That's how I would do it.
Well, to be fair, more than I love random chance, I love resources. In fact, I would say that my failing as a game master is I am overtly obsessed with resources. I'd rather play a game where there was no dice rolls at all, if I'm actually being honest with you. And it's really just about your character has 5 or 6 forms of, like they have a might resource and they have a smarts resource and they have a agility resource. And basically the whole game is just you trading resources for effect, or you trying to regain resources, or trading some might for dex or whatever. I love that. So I'm inclined to agree with Ben there. But Donnie, I'm curious, what would you do?
So per the rules,
yes,
1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 is always a success.
Okay. But
I hate that. I would not do that. I would probably.
You die horribly. You have no chance.
Not automatically, but the finger of God might come down and spin him around and tell him to go in the other direction. I probably agree with Ben on this. I would say, okay, if you want to burn all your luck, that's fine.
Got it.
I'll add 10% per luck point.
So I will say that this sidebar that Donnie is highlighting here, I do like this a lot better. Just because it does feel very quick and easy, and just like. And
you have to remember the game is trying to emulate too. I mean, Runequest, and this is like a streamline of it. It's very, very, very crunchy. So they give you the base option. They give you a couple of other options if
And I
you
like
want to
that.
simplify it.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really what makes the game sing to me.
Right, because I will say that the thing about this difficulty grade is like this undervalues having a good stat, right? Because now if something's very easy and your stat's kind of low, you get as much benefit out of that being easy as a character who had a really high stat. So it kind of compresses the skill range a little bit, right? It brings lower skill and higher skill characters closer together in terms of their efficacy, depending on how things change, which is, good or could be good or could be bad depending on what you want to do with that.
Can you have over 100 in this game? I don't remember.
You can have over 100.
So it's not really a percentile game at that point. It's much more of a D100 game.
Yeah, I mean, but you still have that holdover of a 96 to 100.
Yeah, right. That's the classic. You're like, well, I have 140% chance boating and I failed. So like, what is even going on? What are we even doing here? Right. It's a classic situation. So this might be a good time to talk about it. Just because again, we're not going to have the opportunity. We're going to try to wrap up here in the next, 20, 30 minutes. How does luck work? Now we know from the attributes that your character might get 1, 2, or 3 luck points per session. So this is different from Call of Cthulhu, where it was like, you had more luck and you could burn it on a 1-to-1 basis to affect the d100 roll. And by and large, it really did not come back that quickly, or if at all. What about this? How does luck work? Is it just a second bite at the apple, or?
Yeah. So the two ways that I've seen it played, and I really like the second one, is the two ways that I've seen it played, and the two ways that I've played it is that a luck point is a reroll. You can just re-roll the dice and it might be better, might be worse, who knows. The other one that I've seen that I really like is swapping the dice.
Ooh.
So swapping the tens.
So if I roll 2-8, I could make it an 8-2.
Right. Or yeah. Or well, you would probably do the other thing, but
yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. Low is good. Yeah.
Low is good.
So an 82 becomes a 28.
Yeah, no, I like that if you want to give your players a bone and let them be able to kind of control their fate a little bit. But if you're rolling a 77, that doesn't do you any good. So I choose the first option.
I think that's fun just because I like leaning into the tactile, not tactical, the tactile element of dice. When I love being able, it's cumbersome and fiddly, so I don't like to get into it, and it could be very analysis paralysis heavy. But I like games that I like exploding dice, like as an example of that. I get that it can be a pain in the ass and it can take a longer time, but I love the thrill of that. I love push your luck mechanics, Ben. Like I love, like in Forbidden Lands. I know dice pool systems aside, I love the idea of like you pushing your luck, taking all those 1s and 6s, putting them over to the side, and now those banes have become activated should you fail, and you get to roll the dice again. I like dice as a more, it's not just a random number generator, but actually as something that like the concept of the dice matters. Like a D100 random number generator, unless you're using like Foundry or something like that, like a true D100 generator, like on the internet, is just going to tell you 27. It doesn't care that it's a 7 and a 2, right? Which could be different depending on it. So I like that rule.
Donnie, would you do a house rule where you had spend a luck point and get a bonus die?
Oh,
which goes right between those two, where you go, okay, you're going to throw a third die,
like a third D10.
Mm-hmm.
But if I did that, depending on how I felt that day, would it be a 1s or a 10s, right?
It's always the 10s place, and then you would take the lower of the two 10s place.
Wow, I don't know if I would. I don't know if I would add that. It depends really on the feel of the game at the time, but yeah, maybe that would be something I could keep in my back pocket and almost pull like a devil's bargain with somebody. And be like, hey, spend your luck point.
Yeah.
But if you if you fail, even after you spent your luck point, this is what's going to happen.
Right. Devil's bargains are cool.
That makes it very Call of Cthulhu-ish, but yeah, because that's where that came from. The bonus die and penalty dice, which goes in the opposite direction, is in
oh, that's right. Yeah.
7th edition.
Yeah.
Right. I remember covering that. Beowulf says, I hate exploding dice, but I love narrative dice, push your luck, etc. So see, everybody has different ways of engaging with dice mechanics. I again, don't get me wrong. They are annoying because it can really take a long time, but I do like exploding dice. Does Earth Dawn explode? No, Earth Dawn doesn't explode, does it, Donnie?
Oh, Earth Dawn does explode.
Oh, okay,
yes.
It explodes. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and the great thing about Earth Dawn is you might not know which dice you're going to roll until the moment you roll it.
Exactly. So you need Earth Dawn is really like, I mean, Shadowrun people talk about you want to, because you need a bunch of D6s, but in Earth Dawn you need like at least 4 D20s, a bunch of D20s.
Oh no, I'm fully convinced that this game was made by Chessex. So they're selling some dice or something.
Yeah, if you want to play with your, if you want to have if you want the full need to have the full Royal Crown bag like that, crown, that's, you got to get that. All right. So again, we can see the more specialized skills here in the professional skills that we saw from the base skills that everybody had here, which makes sense. So let's hop over into combat.
This is my favorite part.
And let's talk about how combat works, because I definitely think I want to talk about combat and then I want to talk about magic. So I think that's how we're going to end the stream, is talk about magic.
Yeah. I think we should just really quickly touch on passions, because not everybody has played with passions before. So passions would be it's a skill. It can raise or lower.
Yep.
Just like anything else. And a passion would be like loyalty to a clan chieftain.
Yeah, we see here on the page, or we got, you could have a person, it could be a family member, it could be romantic, it could be a person in an adverse context, an enemy. It could be an organization, a place, an object, an ideal. Okay.
Yeah. And so in certain situations where the passion might come into play, so if you were attacking a hated enemy, you get to add a percentage of the passion skill to your action, to whatever skill you were rolling. So if it was, a member of a rival clan, you might be able to add 20% of your passion to your attack rolls. If it was, this person killed my entire family, I'm going to let you add half of the passion to it, or maybe even more. Is
there any way to add 100% of your passion?
I don't recall. I mean, as a GM, I would totally allow that though. Like, this is your campaign, your story arc ending enemy.
Yeah.
Go for it.
Yeah. Very, very, very Anakin Skywalker.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, and honestly, we just covered. I mean, I think time is flying by here, but a couple months ago we covered Fabula Ultima, and in Fabula Ultima, your character has bonds, which are relationships, positive or negative, and the strength of that bond, whether it's positive or negative, can be called upon by a character to essentially give you a bonus to your dice roll, which could be pretty significant and material. So, I mean, this is very clearly a narrative mechanic, right? Yes. In which, this is the classic D20 roll where your character is D20, your character is just as likely to hit random bad guy number 7 as they are the person who killed his family and murdered his village. There's no distinction in the game between those two. Their AC is 25, then you need a 15 to hit. End of story. Yep. This is a more of a narrative mechanic where it says, no, like in our story, in the game, my character's, hyped up. And arguably, I've heard people go, actually, these are simulationist mechanics, because we've all heard the stories of the mom lifting the car off of the baby, or the kid, right? So like, they're like, the idea that emotional states and the will does affect your ability to perform. Right. So there could be an argument that it's almost simulationist here, but that aside, I love stuff like this. So
yeah, they're fun, but let's get to combat, because that's the icing on the cake.
Okay. All right. Sounds good. So combat, components of combat. So we've got combat. So combat can be very deadly business. Even the greatest hero can be hacked down. What a nice choice of words there. If seriously outnumbered, they can receive grievous wounds if abjuring armor, or suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune if luck turns her back. Combat need not end in death, although commonplace in some genres. Battles do not have to conclude with the demise of opponents. It's easier to end a fight with submission or capturing a foe. Combat is both abstract and tactical. While the rules are not specifically designed for miniatures, tactical maneuvers and techniques are a vital part of combat plays. I'm interested to look at that.
Classic fantasy introduces actual miniature combat.
Got it.
Just as an aside.
I'm just curious, which one are you planning on using, Donnie?
I am not using miniature combat.
Yeah. So I don't know how well this game delivers on this promise, but I will say that my goal and Smith's goal, if I were to ever create a fantasy heartbreaker, is to create a combat system that is both tactical and abstract. I want to create a game that is theater of the mind, but isn't just like, hey, yeah, whatever, nothing matters, right? I want a game experience where it is both tactical and abstract, because I think
you'll get close with. I think you'll get close with this one because they have that.
I think this does it really well because it eliminates things like, your shield side flanking, all those things. As soon as you put those in there, you must have something.
You have to have miniatures. You have to.
Yes.
Now, don't get me wrong. I love that. I mean, there's a part of me that loves that, element. I used to play Warhammer. So like the idea of protecting your flanks and being very cognizant of that is very, very appealing to me. But once you introduce that, you have to introduce miniatures, which is also fun. I like my toys, I like my but it also slows things down. For me,
it does.
Miniatures really slow things down. And
even
it also
D20 doesn't have facing though.
True.
Most a game like this then would have facing rules, and that's when it starts getting like you're really in the weeds at that point. I can tell you from personal experience that BRP, you do not need any kind of map or anything. You might have like an image to give people an idea of what they're dealing with and the terrain they're on, but you don't really don't need it. It doesn't benefit from having it, and the movement is very abstract. It just works really, really well.
Combat is exciting. Very self-congratulatory here. Since combat is inherently dangerous, a well-orchestrated duel or melee will exhilarate players. The advantage swinging to and fro with innovative use of tactical choices and techniques. This sounds like it should be on the back of the box, it's like, no, I already bought the book. You're good. So it says Mythras combat can be either gritty or cinematic. The rules allow for the emulation, I love that they are calling that out, of any genre, from the grim realism as recounted from the Viking sagas to the highly visceral encounters in works of fantasy, such as those written by Howard or Leiber. All the way to mythological epics like the Iliad. Whatever the setting, the Mythras is designed to handle these combatants. So, combat components. We've got combat styles, which we talked about, right? What weapon skills your character is sort of capable of. We've got combat rounds, combat actions, weapon size and reach, engagement, and special effects. So we talked a little bit about combat styles already. This is basically what weapons, what skills is your character proficient with, depending on their profession, depending on their culture, and all that, which is great.
Their training, all of that, yes.
Yeah, their training and whatever. So we've got a little bit of information here, which is two-handed weapons generally have an advantage in both terms of the reach and how much damage is inflicted, but they leave the wielder vulnerable if the weapon is lost. That's usually the case. Shields are the best defensive weapons, it's weird to call them weapons, but I mean, a lot of people have died in history to shield bashes for sure. Shields are the best defensive weapons, able to block fairly large weapons in addition to protecting against ranged attacks, which other weapons cannot normally parry. So no parrying with your sword here. Using two weapons simultaneously offers a greater range of engagement distances and some security if a weapon is broken, dropped, or disarmed. That's not something that we usually think about, in the modern D20 context of why you might dual wield. It's like, well, what if your weapon breaks? What if you, get disarmed? Obviously,
or your left arm gets broken,
or your left arm gets, I was going to say chopped off, but yes. And ranged weapons obviously provide the ability to combat from afar. All right. Combat rounds. It is tracked on a blow-by-blow basis. So this is not an abstract game, right?
Individual hits, yes.
Yeah. And again, I think it's a combat round for 5 seconds long, so it feels about appropriate. In addition to ease bookkeeping, but still reflect the difference in speed in numbers of attacks, fights are broken down into combat rounds of 5 seconds each. During this period, combatants may make hand-to-hand attacks or defend against them, maneuver in and out of combat, fire and throw ranged weapons, and so on. We have a huge table of traits. I don't know what these are, but I'm going to ignore them for right now. I'm on page 89.
Pull it up.
It's just a big list of traits: assassination, batter-aside, formation fighting. We can get back to it.
These are traits that might be granted by a combat style.
Got it.
So style might give you access to some of these.
So is it kind of like a feat?
It's not kind of like a feat, Derek.
Is it kind of like a feat?
It's a little like a feat.
Okay, that's what I thought. All right. We have initiative, which we roll. So, and it's cyclical. So, there's a cyclical initiative order. And upon your turn, you perform a combat action, which comprises a declaration, any dice rolls, and the resolution. Initiative looks like it's pretty standard, but there is an initiative penalty. Characters who are wearing armor are hindered by their armor. So if you're wearing full plate, you are unlikely to go first, is what I'm reading here. Cycles and initiative. Now, once initiative is determined, they have the potential to perform several combat actions during their combat round. Again, by the rules, it could be between 2 to 3, depending on what or even higher if your character was really, really smart or really, really quick. But
you'll get to it. But if it's on your initiative and it's your turn, you can choose to spend a proactive action. That's one of your actions. You can't spend 2 proactive actions. You can only spend 1. And then, the person that you're attacking might be able to spend a reactive action.
Got it.
So the combat will move pretty quick. You're going to blow through those 2 or 3 really quickly.
Got it. Proactive actions can only be attempted on the character's own turn. That is to say, when they have the initiative. Proactive actions are ones in which you are the instigator, such as making an attack with a weapon. Only one proactive action may be attempted per cycle. So in a given round, you still only get to go once, is what I'm reading here. But if my character has 3 actions, I'll be able to take a proactive action and 2 reactive actions, versus a character who only has 2 action points would be able to go 1-on-1.
Well, and this is the idea of they call them round cycles and turns, right? During that first cycle, if you will, on your turn, you can only take 1 proactive, right?
Right.
The next time everybody's done with their first turn, you come back around, you can take your second proactive action.
Got it.
And everybody has a turn. And then if you have 3, that's assuming that, basically you go until everybody's out of action points.
Got it. Okay. That makes some sense. So if you do have multiple actions, it's not like you have to take them all at once, is the key part of this.
Right. You can't.
Got it. But that's still within the same combat round.
And I believe by the rules, you then re-roll initiative.
Oh, interesting. Okay. So, So having a high dexterity might mean that not only do you get to go 3 times in a cycle, but then you're likely to win. So the other person's been out of action points for a while now. You're still stabbing them. Then you re-roll initiative at the end of the round and you win. So then you get to stab them again. Seems pretty brutal.
Yeah.
It reminds me, years ago, we had this idea for something, a similar idea of how many times you get to go per round. And Aaron made a computer program in our computer class in high school. And the idea was that you had this concept called speed, and basically how many times could you go in a combat round. And there's a creature called the Sprite that, due to a glitch, its speed was so high, it created infinite actions. And so the Sprite would just once its turn came up, it would just hit you for 1 point of damage infinite times, and you'd be dead every single time. And we always thought it was pretty funny, like a sort of a natural inclination of what this looks like all the way to the end. All right, so combat actions, proactive. You can attack. You can brace. You can cast a spell. You can delay. You can dither. You can simply... A character can simply decide to waste their turn doing nothing useful.
Dither, yeah.
Thanks, game. That's interesting.
Brace is an interesting one, right?
Okay.
You basically
bring up anything you want to talk about here. That's just totally fine.
Brace is interesting because it's a proactive action that lets you protect a limb or an area.
Got it.
So that you can use it as a way to keep your arm from being chopped off or protect your head.
Interesting. And it lasts until you move away from the place that you planted yourself. Interesting. You could change range. You can mount. You can move. You can struggle. Can I tell you? If you're a victim of certain attempts, you may attempt to break free. You can take cover. You can ready. You can outmaneuver. You can regain your footing. It's basically kind of avoid flat-footed. And then
your reactive actions, I believe.
Yeah. Your reactive actions are you can counter magic. You can evade. So I'm assuming evade works where it's like a skill. It becomes like an opposed roll or something.
Yeah, and it would be you attempting to not get hit as opposed to parry, which is the one that you would use probably the most.
I got it. And it does say that evading leaves you prone. So this is literally you leaping to the ground to get out of the way of an attack. Got it. Interrupt is if you're delaying, you can kind of re-enter the initiative. Parry. You can attempt to defend against an incoming attack using a combination of parrying, blocking, leaning, ducking, or sidestepping. Interesting.
So that right there is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay.
Because the typical combat is going to be, I'm going to attack Derek. I go first, right? I'll swing my weapon and I will get either a critical fumble, a failure, a success, or a critical success. The four normal ranges of success. When you parry, you will roll your combat style and you'll get one of the same four, right? Those determine how much damage you take and whether you get to apply special effects either on the attacker side or the defender side. What gets interesting is if I get a failure as an attacker, meaning I'm not going to hit you, as a defender, you might still want to parry because you're going to get a higher degree of success and be able to apply special effects to the attacker.
Got it. So,
and the special effects are the perfection of the combat system.
And the way that they weigh parrying and attack is just like so good. So good.
When you say so good, you mean in terms of what? Satisfying or
yeah, they just are.
Because I'm hearing there's a shitload of dice rolling going on. That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah,
and so
there is.
You know, it's that line from Robin Hood Men in Tights where he calls in the guards and all the guards in full plate start coming in and he goes, "I hope it's worth all the noise," right? So I mean, I fundamentally enjoy the sort of visceralness of that, but I also understand that now we're rolling percentages, you're rolling percentages, I'm rolling percentages, and so it's like it really needs to feel like that the juice is worth the squeeze there.
That's typically why when somebody's attacking in my game, I will have them roll their chance to hit, their location of where their damage may or may not hit, and the amount of damage at the same time. So we just get that out of the way. Plus, it's also kind of narrative, right? Oh, he missed, but he would have done max damage to your head.
Right. Yeah. I do appreciate that as well.
Yeah.
So weapon size and weapon reach also factor into the game somehow. Size is used to determine a weapon's ability to impose and parry damage, while reach can affect whether opponent lies within range of being struck. These are largely abstract, simplified to help speed play. How nice of them. So what does this mean? It means I can't parry a greatsword with a dagger. Is what I'm assuming it means.
You can. The amount of damage that you're going to reduce that attack by is much lower. So dagger versus longsword, you're going to take half the damage that you would have. If they're both medium-sized weapons, if you successfully parry, that's it. No damage.
No damage. Got it. So does that mean you want the biggest weapon always?
Not necessarily.
Okay.
But
what's the advantage to having, say, a small dagger?
Well, like you mentioned before, you might have two small daggers in case one of your arms gets disabled.
Got it.
If you have a big two-handed weapon and one of your arms gets disabled, but you're not swinging that weapon, right? If you get disarmed, you're not swinging that weapon. And disarm is one of those special effects that you can apply as a defender.
Yeah, the effects are great when we get to them.
They're the best thing about the system.
All right. So again, attacker spends an action point, rolls against their combat style, notes the results. This is what Donnie was telling us. If desired, the defender spends an action point, rolls their combat style, evade, parry, whatever, what have you. The success level of the components are compared as per a differential roll, which is a table I don't think we've seen yet, but I'm imagining it's some sort of X, Y. What did you get? What did I get? What's the effect?
It's the old BRP style of opposed rolls, which is you have I think it's attacker across the X-axis, it's defender on the Y-axis, and then it has a range of results that go from it.
Yep. Any difference grants the combatant with the superior roll one or more special effects, which you guys have been really hyping up, so I'm hoping for this. If the attacker achieved a success or critical success, he may roll weapon damage and apply their damage modifier, if any, from our strength and size. If applicable, a hit location is determined for the blow. And Donnie's saying I roll all that once. And if the defender achieved a success or a critical success, reduce any damage inflicted according to the. So in other words, if the attacker hits, regardless of the differential roll, you're going to be doing damage.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
You're going to be doing damage.
Right.
If the defender also gets a success,
Right.
they will reduce that damage by a percentage.
On the other hand, the differential roll. So you could be, is it possible, like if I fail my attack roll and the defender critically fails their attack roll, I don't do any damage, but I do get a special effect because of the differential difference? Okay.
No. So if you...
We're getting into the weeds now, but...
We're getting into the weeds. But the long and short of it is you compare success levels.
Got it.
So if both of them succeed and they both have a medium weapon, no damage is done. If the attacker fails and the defender gets a success, they get to apply one special. Same way, if the attacker succeeds and the defender fails, they do damage and they get to apply one special. And if the defender chooses not to parry, they're considered to have automatically failed.
Got it. Makes sense.
So...
All right, so yeah, and you can see here, if you parry with a weapon or shield of at least the same size or greater, you parry all the damage, 100%.
Yes.
If you parry with a weapon, now we haven't talked about this. I'm sure it's in equipment. Armor has absorptive values. So, if you're not parrying or you fail a parry, you're not fucked completely.
No.
Is if you have armor.
No, right. It will reduce damage that you're taking. It's not making you more difficult to hit. It's just reducing the damage.
Yeah,
right.
If that location is armored,
right,
then you apply the armor. And the armor in BRP is ablative. So if you have like an armor that does 6, for example, it takes 6 points damage all the time. It's like DR in 3.5.
Sure, damage reduction. Yep. All right. So that makes some degree of sense, and I could certainly, that's a pretty nice incentive to parry, right? I mean, being able to 100% or even 50% absorb a block of incoming attack's damage, especially when my armor can then absorb and ablate the rest. And now we saw you don't have a lot of hit points on some of these hit locations, so we're talking about rolling D8s and D10s and D8s plus D10s against 7 and 8 hit points. It's not a ton of damage that you have in these limbs and heads. So being able
to apply the special effects if you're parrying really makes the combat very cinematic, because now you decide, I did a thing, and if you're going to pass, so now I get to do this other thing on top of it.
It reminds me a little bit.
Don't get hit.
It reminds me. I don't know if you guys caught the Fantasy Age when I did the Fantasy Age first look, where you have this stunt die, and when you get certain successes, you also roll a d6 when you attack. And like if you hit or something, or basically if you crit, then the D6, that's how many stunt points you get to be able to buy like cool special powers and abilities after the fact, like knocking them down or sending their weapon flying or whatever. But it's kind of a similar.
So I just looked it up as an example, right?
Okay.
The lowest armor is 1 damage reduction, 1 armor point.
Yep.
The highest is 8, and that would be articulated plate.
Got it. So 8's
and
a
then
lot.
They have. That's a huge amount, but they also charge by location to buy it.
Got it. So I have articulated plate in my arms, but my chest is covered in silk clothes.
Yeah,
right.
That's where you get these games where it's like, this is what I love about Rollmaster 2, where you might have metal greaves, but you couldn't afford metal for your shins, so that might be something else. And you might have banded armor across your chest. It all depends. But what's real important about this game to know too is it depends on what level of technology your world has. Their plate might not be available. Articulated plate might not even be a thing. It might all be rigid armor. It might just be like breastplates, like Roman style breastplates. So you have to kind of figure out where you are. There might not be chain shirts, might not be a thing yet if the technology level isn't there. And the game goes through exhaustive detail about what each technological era is and what that means for weapons and armor.
Right. And that feels very Traveler-esque, which is also of that era, in terms of the tech level, the TLs. All right. So we've been hyped up about special effects. So here we go. Fighting is far more than simply injuring or killing an opponent. Combative arts teach many methods of defeating a foe. All right. Whenever an opponent engaged in a differential roll of their respective fighting skills, a resulting difference in success levels indicates an opportunity for special effects to occur. This reflects one combatant's maneuvering an opponent into a disadvantaged situation. The number of special effects received depends on the differential table rolls. If special effects are 1, they must be selected before hit and damage rolls are rolled. So this is where Donnie's shortcut system is kind of cutting through the rules a little bit. They cover a variety of special effects and different options. So what do we've got here? Now we get to pick from these.
Yes. Well, it depends. If some of them are only available to the attacker.
Got it.
Sure. Only available to the defender.
Right.
Some of them are only available if you critted on those.
Got it.
Whether the defense roll or the attack roll.
We've got accidental injury. A rise lets a defender spring back up to attack. A bash can knock an opponent backwards. Bleed creates a cutted wound, blinding your opponent, bypassing the armor. That seems particularly brutal. Choose location. And I like that they immediately have a sidebar that goes, the head again.
Yeah.
Some game masters find that choose special location special effect a rather sour annoyance, especially if their players continue to take down foe after foe with exactly the same blow. What? And then I love it. They get so fucking smug here. What may surprise many people to know is that this behavior is exactly matched by real life combatant. Not only is the head the closest part of the body to strike, but shields tend to be held beneath the level of the eyes, exposing the head and part of the face so that you can see your opponent. I love how it's basically just like, yeah, if people are going for the head a lot, it's because fucking people went for the head a lot. Deal with it.
Yeah, it's kind of
I do love how they lead into like, power game is going to power game, and it's
instead they're like,
sorry, but
no,
history is in their favor at this point.
Right? They're like they're not being power gamers. They're just being non-anachronistic, right?
Historically accurate.
Right, historically accurate. You're actually historical. What is it? Historical European martial arts. You're actually being period specific.
Yeah, you're HEMA compliant.
Yeah, you're HEMA compliant. There we go. And that's, yeah, I mean, that seems accurate. That seems true. I mean, if you're given a choice and your opponent, obviously the differential difference, it meant you had that advantage in combat, boom, you're going to strike. And Ben, that reminds me, I think you sent that video. Remember that video that those recreators did of like the historical, I think they had like a fencing rapiers and maybe parrying daggers. You know what I'm talking about? I think they're not American. They're like, I think they're European, but very accurate, period specific of them dueling. And the guy gets cut on his arm and he has to switch to his offhand, but they're fighting. And he finally just lands one blow on the guy's head. It doesn't kill him. It's not like a lethal blow, but he gets one blade into his head and it's all over. The guy at that point is just toast because if you get whacked in the head with a bladed weapon, it doesn't have to kill you for the fight to be over. You're going to go for the head anyways.
Yeah.
And this system's hilarious about that, right? Because you might go for the head and I mean, just getting you 4 hit points in your head, you get it down to 0. They fail a roll, they're unconscious. That's it. Combat's over, right? They don't get a save or anything like that. But you can do the same thing to the abdomen. Monsters have different hit locations. So you take a leg off of a horse, well, it's probably done.
Right.
So those locations, it kind of makes sense. You might choose something other than head, but most of the time you're going to go for the head.
Yeah, that's one of the things again that people speak to the visceralness, and I understand that the earlier editions of Legends of the Five Rings used a different system, but even in 5th edition, your character's hit points are separate from how much damage you've taken. So a character could be at full hit points, suffer a critical hit, and get their head chopped off. And you're like, oh, yep, your character's dead, but you have all your hit points. Like I just bypassed them. It turns out when a katana hits your neck, it doesn't matter what your hit point total is. You're just dead. So I thought, again, it's one of those situations where same things. So we've got circumventing cover, parry, closing the range. This is interesting. Compel surrender.
Yeah.
I believe that's
your sword.
I did. Yes.
I believe that's a crit only one, if I remember right.
Assuming the target is sapient and able to understand the demand, they must make an opposed roll of willpower against the original attack or parry roll. You could defeat somebody with a parry. That's kind of cool.
No, that's not a critical one.
If the target fails, they capitulate. GMs may wish to reserve compel surrender for use only against non-player characters only. You attack. They parry your blade really well versus your willpower. I rolled balls. All right, you surrender.
Yeah, that definitely takes away some agency there.
A little bit. We can see damaging weapons, disarming opponents, dropping foes. forcing failures, flurry, entangling their weapons, impaling. So there's a lot going on here.
Donnie, there is one thing this game doesn't have that VSD has and Rollmaster has and MERP has, and that is, I'm pretty sure there are no groin shots in this game, whereas in MERP there's a chance you will get critted in the groin at one point.
Confirm, no groins in the G's.
No, I mean, stun location, but that doesn't have the same effect, right?
I'm going to play devil's advocate here. One of my criticisms of Legend of the Five Rings is that, and this would be a criticism of Fantasy Age, which I never played, but same thing, which is you're having this exciting combat, right? Dice are flying. People are, on the verge of death. And then somebody in, say, Legend of the Five Rings, generates some opportunities on their dice rolls. And in the game, there's like a fairly lengthy list of things that you can spend your opportunities on, including things that your character has bought as specialized techniques or katas. And so now you've got to consult this list of things. And so this dramatic moment becomes me going, well, let me look it over every single option and see which one is the best. There's a lot of options here. And I get that not all of them are some of them are for the defender, some of them are thing. But when I hit somebody and I get a differential bonus in the differential and I create a special effect, suddenly I'm like, well, am I going to bash them? Am I going to bleed them? Am I going to choose location? Am I going to bypass their armor? Am I going to circumvent their parry? Am I going to compel surrender? Am I going to damage their weapon? Am I going to disarm them? Am I going to drop them? Am I going to duck back? Am I going to entangle them? Am I going to grip flurry them? Am I going to impale them? Am I going to, you know what I mean? So it's like, I do what I worry.
Yep.
That this could cause a lot of like everybody flipping open their books and being like,
yeah.
That's a valid criticism.
I would do it the same way I do it in the 1E game. The first session, the first combat the players went through, I let them take their time and try and figure out how the game works. But second combat, I started like pushing it. By third combat, I use a sand timer. You got 10 seconds. What are you doing? At the end of it, that's it. Moving on to the next person. It's over. So that's exactly what I would do here. When you are doing something, you want that velocity there.
Yep.
You have to have something that is objective, that they can see, that they know. Bang, you flip over that sand timer. You got 10 seconds to tell me what you're going to do. And then Furious Page, or they're just going to blurt out the first thing. And then now you're simulating.
Choose location head.
Yeah.
No, and I have talked on streams in the past about, for me, the value of the sand timer. And I have, I don't have a 10-second sand timer, but I do have a 30-second, a 1 minute, a 2 minute, and a 3 minute timer. I think I might have a 5 minute one too, but I don't use it that often. But and I use them, and I've gotten pushback in people in comments and stuff like that, where they basically say like, oh, I hate that style of play. Like I want to be able to like, have like, I'm like, well, even chess has chess clocks, right? Like, and I guess the question is, do you want to be playing chess in the tournament setting of where you have 4 hours on your clock and I have 4 hours on my clock? Or are we playing blitz, right? Where we have 2 minutes for the entire game. And it's not just about who makes the best decision. It's about making, who can make the best decision given a time constraint, which feels not only more appropriate, but I think is a unique way. There are very few instances in sport or in real life where you truly have infinite time. And so, for all the people out there who say, well, I want the most that's not very tactical. It's like, well, no, actually that is more tactical. It's not like in real combat, you could be like, whoa, hold on. Let me think about this for the next 20 minutes. It's like, no, I'm going to kill you instead. Right. So I do think that there is something to be said about people who are obsessed with creating the best, out of every response, and then essentially create a non-realistic scenario because.
Yeah, I love the idea when you're playing a game like this where there are suboptimal choices, and sometimes you're going to make them simply because you don't have enough time to think of any other choice. And then you have another round to figure it out. Was that mistake a fatal mistake, or is it just, not enough time? And then while it's not your turn, you know what that player is doing. They are absolutely going through the book and finding that page so that they know what to do next time. And
well, this also gets to it kind of rewards player skill, right? Like hey, you paid attention, you learned the fucking game. So,
you get rewarded by being better and doing more things.
Well, because I sorry, Donnie, I'll let you go, but
oh, I was just gonna say I do find that in this game though, if the GM is helping the narrative along with, you take your blade and you hook him under the leg and drop him, right? That the next person that comes up with a special effect, you're almost leading into what that special effect's going to be by helping describe the combat or having the players describe the combat.
I would absolutely assume that like a group of like mine who would play this game would definitely lean into sort of what's the narrative feel for here, like if I hit him with a spear, it's like, oh, I'm going to impale him, because that feels what's dramatic, that feels like what's appropriate, like not always what's the most optimal decision, but it is interesting that we kind of align on that, because I agree with that. I think, I've gotten pushback before from members of the Knights of Last Call Patreon when we've had conversations about how I like to use timers, and a lot of people have a lot of umbrage at that. And, Aaron and I always used to call it, like a lot of times, like we'd call for initiative and I'd be like, okay, I got to go to the bathroom. And they'd be like, all right, war room, war council. And it'd be like them just like, hatching together a plan. And it was because I was in the bathroom, or because, I had to go get the minis off the shelf or something. But a lot of people feel like they should be able to do that on every single player's turn. And I completely disagree with that. I think the feel of a game, you got to set some boundaries. So there's a lot more of these than I thought there would be, which is both good and bad for all the reasons that we've just talked about. But I could definitely see where, and they do give you a nice big summary table here of everything that you can do. But it is maybe there's 20, 25 things here. And again, I also love the idea that, in Pathfinder 2nd edition, this is a great example of it. Like you have to choose between doing the, attacking and doing the cool thing, or like, I'm going to trip them. And I like that a game like this makes it so that, you get to attack, and the trip or the disarm or the knock prone or whatever, it's like this fun bonus that you get after the fact. The Fantasy Age game, which we did the same thing. And I like that idea. I like that concept. Now, this raises the interesting idea. I don't know if the game has this, but like, if I want to just, one of the options here is a pin weapon, which means I have to attack, do damage because I'm attacking, and get the pin weapon. Can I just pin weapon? Is that an option that you can do in this game? What if I'm like, I don't want to do damage, I just want to pin his weapon?
So this actually came up on the Mythras forums. By the rules, you have to do damage, but everybody normally house rules that the damage is optional.
Right.
That's it because the book never spells it out. In so many words. So
right. And the reason I bring that up is because in Fantasy Age, they had this cool idea, right? When you hit with a normal attack and you got a good enough attack, you generated these only when you're attacking, you would generate these stunt points, which would come off of a D6. And certain awesome, cool, powerful, really powerful things cost like 5 or 6 stunt points. So you were unlikely to get them because you're only rolling a D6. But like tripping a foe took 2. But there was an option in the game that was like an attack that did 0 damage, but it always generated 2 stunt points. So it was like a way to basically get a special effect, and maybe it's a little bit, but you're guaranteeing a special effect, but at the cost of 0 damage, which is kind of an interesting idea. And obviously certain options become pointless. I go for the head, guaranteed, and do 0 damage, right? It doesn't matter, to a certain extent. But I could see.
I'm not going to help my argument here, Annie, because you're talking about them picking one special. But
right.
if an attacker were to critically fumble, and you were to succeed on parry, right?
You get 2.
That's 3.
Oh, 3. I go for the head. I ignore armor.
Yeah, it's 3 because the max is 4. So yeah, you can stack these. I'm going to bleed him. So that location is taking damage every round. Armor be damned. He can't, they have to stop it. It's a deadly system when it gets down to it.
Right.
Because we didn't really talk about the wounds, but say you have 4 hit points in a location. If you get that down to 0, that it's functionally useless. They can make it an endurance roll. If you get that to -4, so negative total, it's gone. It's mangled beyond use. If you do that to the head, they're decapitated. I mean, that's so it doesn't take much. A bleed, a choose location, and one other thing, and you've got somebody down and out. So
All right. Well, I mean, it's a very robust combat system, and Donnie, I'm assuming that that's one of the reasons why you like the game.
It is. No more 2-hour combats. Combats will be over and done much more quickly.
Right.
That's probably one of the biggest things that drew me to it, to tell you the truth.
Got it. Quick
How big
into
is your group, Donnie? I'm sorry. How big is your group?
It's either 3 or 4.
Okay. Yeah.
3 or 4 players.
Players, yes.
Yeah, because my MERP game is 7 players now, so those combats get a little involved. But I mean, with 7 players, it's going to be a thing. But it's also fun watching them all be afraid at the same time. Because if they could Pathfinder 2. If you had 7 players, they would be like.
I'm on the books. I'm on the hook to run a Northern Reaches Pathfinder 2 raid at the end of the month. It's going to be I think it's going to be 13 players in a Pathfinder 2 game. Needless to say, I'm going to be using some sort of timer. But actually, in those situations, what I like to use is a group timer, where I basically say like every 30 real minutes or every 1 hour real time, like the boss gets, the big dragon or the big whatever, gets some sort of mega attack or big bonus. And so, sure, wither dither, and by the way, if it gets to the 3-hour mark or whatever, like it's cataclysmic, it's completely destructive. So yeah, it's not officially, I'm not going to like nickel and dime your term, but if you guys waste a lot of time, it's your time to waste, and just make the game harder for you.
My goal with this is basically I want a 30-minute combat at most, and we're done. We're down and out. So.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's a whole separate conversation about like how long do I want a combat to be? I don't actually know anymore. I used to think I knew, but I don't actually know anymore.
Yeah,
not an hour. I'll say that, and definitely not more than an hour.
Yeah.
All right, magic. There's a lot more to combat. There's wounds. There's hit points, but I do want to talk about magic. Because that's the last thing I kind of want to discuss. So real quickly, in the next 10 minutes, we're not going to go through everything here, but how does magic work in Runequest? Because again, there's a whole section here about magic points, sacrificing, ritualism. What is the general concept of magic?
Think of it like just in the core rulebook. Think of it like 4 schools. You got the folk magic, animism, theism, and sorcery, I believe.
That sounds right.
And those are varying power levels. And if you are a magic user, you might belong to a cult or a brotherhood that would give you access to both folklore and say theism. And you might be able to get learn spells from each one of those. And they give examples what those spells are, and you would use magic points to cast them or to increase their intensity if they have intensity. Or you might use magic points to bind a spirit to you and get it to perform an action for you, attack or.
And looking here, and we're in folk magic, so obviously this is probably the more like but like the spells are fairly they're fairly prescriptive, right? Like they say what they do. This summons an unseen servant. This lets you hold your breath in airless or otherwise hostile environment. Blade sharp makes your increases steps, even though it's basically not calling that. So it is a situation where there might not be hundreds of spells like there is in most D&D type games, but there's still like a list of maybe like 50 to 60 spells in a given.
And these are just examples, right?
Oh.
They tell you that the GM builds these spell lists, tells the players what's available, what's happening. They're describing it. These are just examples. And so this is the part of the game where I've spent the most time kind of converting my world over, is building the rules around what these spells look like and what folk magic looks like.
So let's say I want to cast Blade Sharp.
Mm-hmm.
Blade Sharp is cast on an edge or pierce melee weapon. It increases the damage of the weapon by 1 dice step, and incidentally leaves the edge honed after the spell concludes. This is often used on tools such as axes, plows, and razors. Thus, casting it increases the damage step, etc., etc. What would be involved in casting a spell? Is there a check? Do I do it automatically? Do I have slots?
Typically, there will be a skill associated with each one of these. So
right. So I have a folk magic skill.
Yeah, there's a devotion skill, a sorcery skill. things like that. But like for something like Blade Sharp, unless you're doing it in combat, that's going to be an automatic. You're just going to be able to do it. I'm not going to make you roll for that. And then you can spend your magic points to increase intensity, which is essentially effect. But spending the magic points also has a downside in that the GM determines what happens when you are out of magic points. It could be if you're out of magic points, you fall unconscious, or maybe you reach a higher level of fatigue.
Right, I got this. Fatigue accrual, hit point attrition, unconsciousness, willpower, die.
Yeah. So pick however deadly you want your magic to be.
And again, it even says here, it says these options can of course be mixed and matched if the GM desires. So there's no one answer. It's more of like, how do you want magic to feel in your game, right? And magic points.
And they even talk about like, hey, if you're going to go into a sci-fi, this might be force powers. This might be, something along those lines.
Right. And I can see here that you recover them. And again, it could be one magic point per hour for a very magic rich campaign. It might be one magic point per week for a low magic campaign, right? Or even ones only that are tied to specific conjunctions like Night of the Full Moon, which is very evocative, and you can easily see how that can really tie, it's very diegetic, right? Like tying the world's feel to the magic.
And they say things like sacrifices to get magic points back and things like that.
It's very much tied to, once again, that Bronze Age kind of thing where the culture, is the organization, where you don't just, unless you decide that it's just something people have and everyone has it, or are you going to have it be, there's some type of rite associated with it. And then you could really tone it down where it would be more like vague divination instead of it does a thing. It might be, I want to know, will we win our next combat? That might be a whole thing. And then lightning comes in, depending on how the tree splits in half, is a yes or a no. That you could have it be that, or you can have the magic be like full Vancian style hurling lightning bolts back and forth.
Right.
The casting times can be extremely short or really long, measured in rounds. It really is up to the GM to tune it, but they do fall into these basic ideas of, if you're only allowing folk magic, for example, what would that look like traditionally? Mm-hmm. How would you make that work?
And if you didn't want to go through all this as a GM, you don't want to go through and decide all of this yourself, and you're playing in like a fantasy, you can just pick up classic fantasy, and it has those normal spell lists. It has everything laid out for you, it has all the rules if you want to do it that way. I actually prefer kind of building this mythos around your magic system. I think that's a very cool GM.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
Love it.
What do you mean by that? I'm curious.
Well, everything that Ben was mentioning, how often am I going to get that magic back? What do I have to do? Do I have to sacrifice? Do I have to?
Right. This sounds very seventh sea to me, Ben, with all the different magic traditions there's like so many. There's so many
related to your, literally it's in your genetic code, some of them, where if you're not a man, you can't use certain types of magic in 7th Sea. If you're not from a certain culture, you literally can't do Porte magic if you're not Montaigne.
And this is something I've shit on before, which is, Ben likes to say that the system is setting, but I think that is not that is sometimes not true, but I will say it is never not true when it comes to magic. And, if you think about most of your classic fantasy stories, whether it's the Force in Star Wars or it's Weaving in Wheel of Time or whatever the fucking Stormlight Archives from Brandon Sanderson, magic and how magic works is such an integral part to these fantasy stories and the rules of magic and how magic is perceived. And the standard D20 model is pretty milquetoast, in terms of what it implies. In fact, actually the implication of standard D20 magic is, shouldn't we be living in a magical utopia where everything is catered to us by magic because it's essentially limitless and free and there's no consequences? And so I do think one of the reasons I love Earth Dawn is because of its magic system and how that literally ties into the history of the world, how you, by learning the mechanics of casting spells in Earth Dawn, you are also becoming wise in the ways of how this world functions on a fundamental basis, and how it's shaped history and all these other factors. And that just comes from learning the magic system. Which is
that and in that system specifically, not only does that get you access to that history, that data, it also hastens the thing that you're trying to avoid and makes it more aware of you. So it's that we could talk about Earthbound.
So, I mean, this is definitely a magic system that is, it's not your fire and forget type system, right? It is more involved than that. It has to do with your culture. It has to do with the way that the GM wants to perceive magic in the world. And depending on what you do with those magic points, as you were pointing out, up until you die, and again, in my opinion, that is like one of the classic things in Wheel of Time. It's like, yeah, you can go as powerful as you want, but if you channel too much energy, you could burn out. You could lose your magic ability forever, or you could die. And that makes magic, well, it makes it feel magical. And, Boothby in chat says D20 magic sometimes practically feels like a science. It's perfectly codified. It's well known. It's more of a procedural experiments. Mythras is definitely not going for that angle. So very interesting. And again, you've got folk magic, animism, mysticism, and sorcery, and theism. So actually there's 5.
Oh, there are 5. Yeah.
And you can use any or all of them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's all up to you how you want it to work. Like, well, Donnie's talking probably more in line with like the theism, where you have, and also Runequest is very much in that, in animism, where it's tied to your culture, but it's also tied to what gods do you worship. These types of gods will grant certain types of abilities. And to do that, you have to find, go to the right shrine and find the right instructor. And then you have to have a high enough charisma to convince them you're not a jerk, and you are willing to learn those traditions from them.
So as we kind of wrap up here, we're getting close to 9 o'clock, so I'm going to wrap. What would you say as a system Mythras is, what is it trying to do? I mean, that's obviously trying to be have a degree of simulationism. It's trying to be sort of a realistic portrayal of a game system. But like from a TTRPG perspective, like what is this game actually trying to accomplish?
It being a BRP system at the lowest level is, I want to provide a stable platform for GMs to make a decision on what they want to use and what they don't want to. And I think from the very beginning of this book, they tell you, use what you want. It won't break the system.
Right.
And I think in that aspect, it succeeds.
Right.
From everything that I've seen, I could remove fatigue from the game and it doesn't break the game.
Got it. Right. So it is kind of designed as a grab bag of different ideas. Because I mean, we just talked about all those magic systems. You could use none of them. You could use all of them. You could use some of them. And even the rules say, and you might have different rules of magic for each of the different types. Sorcery might kill you, but folk magic just makes you tired. Right? Like that's totally acceptable. Right? You're not trying to balance it again. Well, what if the folk wizard magic, it's like, no, I don't care about that. Right. So, I would argue that, it's almost more of like it's almost like a narrow, I don't know. It's more like a mechanical way of world building.
Yeah, it's not narrow mechanical.
Yeah, it's not narrow mechanical. Yeah, I had to stop myself.
Mecho narrative.
Mecho narrative. Yes. We just had a $50 tip from our good buddy GM Scott. GM Scott coming in and says, half for Ben, half for Donnie, half for more first looks. All right. Fair enough. So he's putting $25 towards each to get us towards there. Thank you so much for the support, GM Scott. Hopefully you got a long VOD to watch. It is mostly Donnie, Ben, and I waxing poetical about our different thoughts and philosophies. Although we do talk about, I think, a fair amount about the game. We did get into the weeds a little bit. But
yeah, this is like the Forbidden Lands forum that we have on in the Discord, which is like, it started off talking about Forbidden Lands, but it quickly went sideways into other things.
But I really like what you were getting there too, Ben. It's not narrow mechanic, because I started to say it and I stopped myself, but you knew what I was going with, which is to say the game isn't trying to create some sort of story line. You know, like Avatar is trying to create the Legends, the Powered by the Apocalypse game by Magpie, is trying to create a game system that supports the kind of narrative character arcs that the characters go on in Avatar and learning about themselves and the perils and the promises of finding yourself in balance, right? That's not trying to do this. But what it is trying to do is it's trying to give you a toolbox where you can use these rules to kind of create the kind of fantasy world that you and your players want to engage in, whether that's because of the feeling of the setting or because of the mechanics that you want to engage in. Right. Like it says, it could be gritty or it could be cinematic. It all depends on like what knob or dial you want to turn it to. So it's not GURPS because it's not GURPS-ish, but it does have an element there of almost like being like a toolkit.
Yeah. But it's never not serious, the combat. Nowhere in it does it say that it's inconsequential or,
Sure,
you know, it's a cinematic, but it's still, you know, has its consequences are there depending on how you want to play. You definitely have to have a group that is going to play a little smart when they play this, because they might not have a second round to pick up from their mistakes. But if you're wearing armor, they probably will. But everything else is, like you said, is very open-ended and almost very loose. But then you have the combat system, which is like very structured and really super crunchy, which I love games that do that. And this one does it just super well.
I equate it to like eating at a buffet in Vegas, right?
Okay.
If you didn't get what you wanted, that's your fault.
Right. They had options. They had it there.
They had options, right?
Yeah.
So.
Would you say that this system is not a good fit for newbies?
Not for new GMs.
Yeah.
For new players, I think you could easily, because I've walked through, I don't know how many players through AD&D lately.
A lot.
You can teach them, and I tell everyone.
By the way,
first combat, you will know.
By the way, if you want to play Advanced Dungeons and Dragons First Edition, and you want to play with the Knights of Last Call, and you want to play with Ben, the Game Master, maybe join our Patreon. We've got a lot of people say, oh, it's a Pathfinder 2. There are like more people playing play by post and like AD&D in our server these days. Now, some of the play by post is Pathfinder 2, but it's still not what you're traditionally thinking of when you think of Pathfinder 2. It's, play by forum post. But we have more people in our play by post and more people in our AD&D games and more people playing Traveler nowadays than it seems sometimes than we have playing Pathfinder 2nd Edition. Don't get me wrong. If you want to play Pathfinder 2, there's a lot of options on our Discord as well. But, part of the point of Knights of Last Call is to provide an opportunity for new players who most people came here because they were playing D20, right? They were playing 5th edition or they were playing Pathfinder 2nd edition. They found their way in here, and either they already had an interest in some of these games or they had never even heard of these games. And then through exposure, people become much more interested in playing a lot of these games. And, I'm not immune to that. There's a lot of games on this shelf behind me that I got because of this guy right here. And so, I definitely think that maybe Mythras isn't for you, but there might be 10 other games that are, and you've just never heard of them. You've just never played them. So, it's definitely worth checking out. And we definitely try to keep our ear to the ground when it comes to that. I know you don't love these, Ben, but Donnie, GNS. What sort of game narrative simulationist score would you give this game? Again, the idea being that, we usually say that a game like D&D is more like a 3 to 3 to 4 on the game score, whereas a game like Pathfinder 2 is more like a 7 or like maybe even an 8. How would you say this rates as a game?
As a game, see the problem is that it's a basic system. There's not going to be a whole lot of power gaming here, right?
Right.
I'm gonna put it right in the middle. I'm gonna be completely indecisive about this.
Because there's a lot of crunchy elements here. There's a lot of game. There are game mechanics. But it doesn't
there's some crunch.
Yeah, but it doesn't seem like
there's
it's
some selections.
Right.
That you can do.
Yep.
Especially in the effects. Maybe a little higher.
Yeah. Picking the special effects feels very gamey to me.
Yeah.
But
But the thing,
it's
it's
not
also very narrative, though. I mean,
sure.
you're narrating that combat
Yeah, it's
by
also
picking that special effect.
it's also
So-
very simulationist. But I would say that the thing about it is that the game, the RPG system, doesn't really seem to be concerning itself too greatly with like creating a completely balanced and repeatable and whatever like procedural thing, right? Like when we think about games, we want like an even playing field. Both teams have a chance. This is all about. I'm not trying to say like all games are combat as sport, but there's an element there of the mechanics and the preservation of those mechanics comes first. This is a game that flat out tells you ignore whatever rules you don't want to use and throw them out. Yeah. So I can't say that I rate it super high as a game score. But I do think that it feels like there's more elements here. Ben, you feel free to disagree. It feels like there's more game elements here than like first edition AD&D.
Yeah, there's a little bit more game in this.
Right. Yeah, not a lot, but a little bit. Yeah.
Yeah, for me, kind of where the rubber hits the road for me in terms of where this fits on the plot is, does the game care whether the characters, that is the player characters, live or die at the end of a session or combat? And they're never referred to as heroes in this game. It's never told, that there's no expectation of them saving the universe from some existential threat. And to me, that is where it really starts going into that simulation, where you are creating a world and you decide those rules, although it's giving you the carte blanche to decide those rules. But once they're set, the world operates in accordance with those rules, and that makes it very simulationist. But then it loses some points because it doesn't have like strict movement rates or flanking or any of those other kinds of things. So it gives you a little bit of game stuff, a little bit of narrative stuff in there. But for me, when I read it, the way I know I would run it, it would be like 75%
simulationism. By the way, we had a super chat from Lovefist who says, I still haven't even played Pathfinder. And that's quite all right. Hopefully there's enough stuff here on our channel. We try to strike a balance. We have audience members. We have patrons who like Pathfinder 2 and play it. We're playing it as we speak. But we do try to create a lot of opportunities for other games. But thank you very much for that, Lovefist. I appreciate it. Beowulf says, did we cover character progression? I might have been out around or just not paying attention to it. We hinted at it earlier. We never went super deep into it, but it uses the idea of experience rolls, which is the idea that if your character uses a skill and generates experience rolls, you basically get a chance at the end of a session to roll. And if you succeed at that roll, which gets harder the better your skill is, that it increases the skill. I assume by a D10?
No, I believe it's much less than that.
Oh, okay.
I believe, if I remember correctly, it's a D6, and you can choose just to take a 3.
Got it. So 3%. There you go. And then again, remember too that if your character has a high charisma, they actually get some of these rolls for free. So having a high charisma means that you get a couple more bites at the apple than maybe some of the other players. So we didn't go super deep into it, Beowulf, but long story short, you need to use your skills in order to improve them, but success isn't guaranteed. It is not a level-based system. It is a use it or lose it type system, and that's how I would describe it. So I would argue that the progression, while linear, is actually more like logarithmic, right? Where your character can increase quickly to a point, and then everything starts to slow way down. And it's really hard to be good at something and keep getting better. And the game is kind of designed to sort of punish you in that respect. But yes, that is the answer to that. So yeah, I tend to, now I will say about the narrative, luck, the passions, these are elements that just D&D does not have at all. And I like them, and I think that adds a lot to a game. Certainly the type of style of game I'm playing that I really like to do. So, I think it's pretty middle of the road in there. I actually think that those are like maybe a 3 or a 4. I think those are big. I think those are big elements, and I think it adds a lot to the game. But I agree with Ben, because fundamentally the best way to describe this is when you're adding a magic system to your game in Mythras. You're not doing it because of game balance or gameplay reasons. You're not doing it because it's going to create you're doing it because that's what you're trying to build a world. And again, more and more that I look at this system, I feel like it's really just a way as a GM to express an idea of a world, build a sandbox, if you will, and then see how that plays out. Let the players go and do stuff. And it's like, oh yeah, in this world, shit's crazy. We could build it. You could have built it a completely different way, and you might have gotten a different output. So it's kind of a simulationist test bed, a sandbox to see how things sort of would play out.
Yeah, it reminds me very much in the original Clash of the Titans where they had the clay figurines.
The clay figurines, yeah.
That's very much what, when I was reading this book, I couldn't shake that feeling of it where you are, okay, I want to have one of these kinds of things in here, and I want to have one of those kinds of things in here, and you just put them in there, and then, like you said, you're running the sim to see how it works, and if it doesn't work, you gut it out or start over.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of fun. Beowulf says, no feats or special abilities or talents. Not like feats in the D20 sense. No,
not in the core. Now, and if you look at classic fantasy, which is their add-on for D20, you get some special abilities and stuff there.
So Mythras is one book. The people who produce it are producing a lot of books. If you go on a drive-through RPG, there's at least a couple, at least maybe like 10 volumes of different stuff. And one of the optional add-ons is classical fantasy, which adds in some more of those typical high fantasy elements, a little bit more anime powers and, more races and some of the stuff that we kind of come to expect out of a D&D type game. But by and large, that is not what this game is trying to innately be.
No, what I do see a lot of people do is we'll tie a special ability into a combat style. And once you get in a certain level of that combat style, then you get access to that. Or conversely, a passion. You get a special ability if your passion gets high enough.
I like that, right? Because then you're still getting some cool things that make you feel distinct and unique. But again, you're tying them into something in the game. You don't have this because I leveled the 3 and I took this feat. And you're like, well, why do you have this power? And you did, I don't know. But like if there's some cool power and it's like, oh, I have this because I learned, the hammer and anvil style from the dwarves of Krundakar, and that gives me access to this special power. That feels very diegetic. That feels very earned, and it feels very, makes sense in the context of the game. Or to your point about the passions, it's like, there's some special ability, never say die. And you're like, well, I have that because my character reached such a level of fervent devotion to this ideal or to this organization. And so it feels very tied into the world. It's not just some, one of the things I hate the most about feats is that you pick them in a vacuum, like they don't mean anything. They don't come from anywhere. They don't shape anything about your character. Sure, they shape the way you might function in combat, but they don't like build into your character's story, nor do they build into the world's story, which is one of the reasons I don't like feats at times. So, all right. Well, 9:00, 1 minute over. So we're going to wrap it up there. I want to say big thank you to Donnie. Big thank you to Ben for coming on and joining with me tonight on a Sunday night. Shout out to all of people who came in tonight. We actually had more people tonight than I expected us to have. We bounced around between 30 and 40 viewers, which is actually really, really good for us. Way more than Root. But again, these Sunday streams are really just about us hanging out and talking. And, if you want to talk with, screw me, but if you want to talk with these guys, if you want to talk with fellow people who are passionate and interested in gaming, I highly recommend checking out our Patreon, because that is going to get you access to a bunch of extra bonus content and videos and all this other stuff. But really what it's going to get you access to is our Patreon, which is only for to our Discord, which is only for our Patreon members. And that means that the people who are there are, they're there for a reason. They're there because they want to learn. They're there because they want to teach. I would say 80+% of the people in our Discord are game masters, and many of them very experienced game masters. And so there is a huge learning opportunity to come in there, and you will get it from both sides, because we have a very open policy where, we don't want to encourage groupthink. You'll see people disagreeing, and that's okay. We appreciate that. And we all do it respectfully. And honestly, as far as the internet goes, it's about as good vibes of a place as you could possibly get. So, Ben, Donnie, any last words before I send us out?
It was a pleasure. And I got to give all credit to Ben. He was the one that was like, hey, you've got to go check this system out. All right, well, that's a lot of work for me now, but still, it's an amazing system. Can't recommend it enough so far.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
I did warn you that would be a big lift, but it would be
Yeah.
worth the effort. So yeah, it's a great game. Thanks for the discussion. This is awesome as always. It's great fun to nerd out like this.
Yeah, well, it was great to have you guys back on. Donnie, better because you didn't have to roll d20 rolls, so we didn't have to see how horribly you roll, but that did help out a little bit. I look forward to having both of you, either of you, on in a future stream. It's always great to talk with you. All right, thanks everybody for coming out tonight. Thank you to our incredible people who supported us throughout this stream. Love Fist, GM Scott, Henry, great role playing Debbie. We appreciate all the amazing support. People like you allow us to continue to do what we do. And of course, we couldn't do any of this without folks like Donnie and Ben here, who have been incredible members of our Patreon for so very long. In fact, it continues because this week we have one of our OG patrons, just like these two guys, who's been around basically since the beginning. Vin, who you may have seen him when he joined us for our Poppet adventure where Donnie played with Vin. But he's coming in all the way in from Australia. So naturally, we're going to have him here in Ohio, and he's going to stop by and do a stream with us this week. So lots of fun guests this week, and I look forward to seeing all of you on future episodes of Knights of Last Call. Peace, everybody.